So now it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our guest, Michael Tsarion. Michael Tsarion is an alternative historian, I would say psychic detective, and maybe you could even say a good doctor, or maybe a medicine man, for his diagnosis and his prescription for what ails humanity, and his ability to find this problem and track it back to its roots. Well, I think he's unmatched in his field at this ability. But if you're looking for someone to gently tear off the band-aid to expose the wounds, well, maybe you need to look somewhere else, because as one Chinese medicine instructor told me one time, he said, true compassion is ruthless compassion. He said, you're never going to help anyone if all you do is hand out crutches and reinforce their weakness. He said, you must find and support their strength if you want to help people. Well, that is exactly what Michael Tsarion does so well. Is he reveals the problem, and he doesn't mince words about it, and he doesn't try to sugarcoat it either. He's taking a real hard look at these things, and he's calling it like he sees it. That's honesty. Now, he doesn't just analyze and expose this darkness. He has thoroughly educated himself as to the solutions, as to the cures. He has asked himself, what is it going to take? What do we need to do to relieve ourselves of this burden? So he's taken a hard look at the problem, and he's taken a hard look at the solutions, and he has a whole lot to offer. And this is our mission. This is the purpose of the Psychonautilus, is to find the answers, is to seek the truth, to free the consciousness of humanity from the forces that seek to enslave our spiritual energy, our souls, and our minds. So I am very happy to welcome aboard the Psychonautilus, Michael Tsarion. Oh, one thing first. This wasn't without some type of amateurish error. I did record it. Don't worry, I got it. But I didn't record all the hello, how are you doing? Welcome aboard, Michael Tsarion type of chatter. So we just start straight up at the beginning of the conversation. And we had a great conversation, and it went on for quite a while. So this will most likely be broken into 3 different episodes. Now, he names a lot of names while he's talking. He names a lot of authors, and he names a lot of books. He's read so much. If you go to his websites, you'll see he has huge lists of links. He has a huge list of resources, of books to read, and of places to look. So all of the things that he may throw out here, if you don't catch it, go to his website, look at those lists, look at those links. It's phenomenal, the amount of information that he has right there for anyone to help themselves to. So here we go. Michael Tsarion. How much have you been paying attention to this, the concept that there's this New World Order idea where they can take the Gaia, Sophia type of theory or philosophy and turn that into a one world religion?
Well, that's also what Patrick Allen, was talking about we went to Liverpool recently and did a conference, and each of the speakers was interviewed by Red Ice Creations, and I remember distinctly checking out Patrick. You know, I like people like Patrick Allen who are very much against any kind of world paranoia. You know, they have a very positive message of optimism and more importantly realism. That look, you know, he doesn't go as far as like I would go so far as to say that what your consciousness is what you create in the external world. He didn't bring any such psychology to bear, but he did also just simply from a grassroots point of view stipulate, and his interview is up on Red Ice, you know, that, you know, people shouldn't be afraid, and it's a wonderful time to be alive, and there should be no sense of paranoia and things like that. So I was always interested to check out, you know, I like teachers like that. And he also added during the Liverpool conference interview that he believes that absolutely there has been a agenda to either co-opt or circumvent, you know, the green movement, etc. Of course, that would then imply that it's coming through what is traditionally conspiracy-oriented groups. It would not be that. It would be the opposite. It would be that the conspiracy is moving through, you know, a scientific sphere of operation, right? From the science milieu. And a lot of people have a difficult time, you see, accepting that conspiratorial activity operates through the science world, you know, until you've studied it, until you've studied NASA, you know, which is never, what's it, never give a, what is it, NSA,
Yeah, never a straight answer.
Right, exactly, things like that. So, you know, you've studied the moon situation, or you've studied, you know, the great contradictions, the great war to suppress the Wilhelm Reichs and the Velikovskys and, oh my goodness, the Raymond Royal Rifes, you know. So until you've studied all of this, average people will not accept that any kind of conspiracy is operating in the science world. You know, they just are be reticent to believe that because, of course, we all believe that science is objective and scientists are very much objective, you know. And, of course, nothing is further from the truth. Those who've studied it know that the conspiracy against the psyche, the conspiracy against man, the war on consciousness, the war on thought is very, very much a scientific, you know, has a scientific component. You know, there's no question about that. I mean, even the latest DVD that we have done together with the Red Ice, you know, which is called Mass Control and the future of mankind, you know, is a 2 to 3 hour, you know, DVD that focuses entirely on that just how complicit the science world is with a lot of their technology and so on, and people only have to pick up, you know, like a Jim Keith type of book to really examine the Dr. Delgados, you know. Now we've got a new generation of these, you know, monsters who very much have worked, who are scientists who very much work for the, to the detriment of the human race. And I do believe that for a long time, not just recently, but for a long time, these so-called eco or, you know, environmentalist groups have also been part of this, you know, maybe not as in hard a way as the Einsteins and the Oppenheimers and the Leo Szillards, you know, with their creations of bombs and all of this kind of thing, but still it's been there, and it's been just moved to the front a little bit, you know, perhaps to give people a false understanding of the world that they're living in, and again, that, you know, trying to make nature something that is possibly, you know, here's something that's broken, we need to fix it, we're the experts, we're the men in the white coats, and all of this kind of nonsense, you know, that again makes us feel very vulnerable in the world, vulnerable on the planet, you know, acid rain, and, you know, all of these things. First of all, you know, it's science and it's the corporate world that's creating all of this nonsense, all of this pollution, and all of this degradation. You know, whether you look at the ozone problem or whatever else, you know, the seas, I mean, you know, it's the plastic bottles or any of this kind of thing, or the, you know, the pollution in the past, or the coal mining, or the open cast mining, the deforestation. It's the corporate world with the help of science that is, you know, has justified all of this down the line. So obviously, it's rather preposterous to have another coterie appear to now sort of be scaling back on that and even claiming that there is all of this. You know, global warming, all of these kind of things. So one has to be skeptical. Some of this could be true, so then go and study it, but also listen to a lot of alternative sources. Yeah. People need to use their mind rationally to think about all of this, and think about what, you know, is changing in your psyche. You know, do we see the sky anymore the same way? You know, just go down to very, very simple paradigms of just when you see chemtrails across the sky, every in every city of the world, you even find them out to sea. where there's no cities, chemtrails are there, and even in the countryside, So what happens if tomorrow we found out that they're not chemtrails, and they, just hypothetically I'm speaking here, just for a moment, just imagine that in fact there is no chemical poisoning. That's all something they maybe want you to believe by insinuation, but just the fact that every time you look up to the sky you've got a grid of these chemtrails, is that not changing your relationship to the open sky, which is far more sinister in my eyes?
And we didn't have them when we were growing up. I mean, I've been paying attention to the sky since I noticed it, and I would have been too, So I mean, when you look at the videos of James Sanger, and he got really into it because he had a massive display of chemtrails above his house, and that's here in France. And he started really looking into it. That he found the chemtrails on the satellite photographs, especially on the big days that he noticed. He went and he found I guess it's weather satellites that you can access the files from. I don't know what website he did that on, but he got them, and you can see them. I mean, just plain as day, it looks like road rash, and it's obvious grids.
And there were older pictures as well. They're in black and white photographs, from dating from the 1950s and before.
Really?
And of course we know that many people have noticed the haze that never used to be there before, and of course we commonly think that was maybe smog or something like that. But it's in cities by the ocean where there is no smog. So is there something on a fundamental psychological level that of course if these people have declared war on the psyche of man, which I believe they have, then that does involve an environmental component. And what better than to have your men, just as you have your men in the World Bank and your men in the the United Nations or in NATO, or in the EU. Why can't you have your men in Greenpeace? Why can't you have your people in the Red Cross? Anyone who studied secret societies and their operations for a long enough time actually knows that they began in the charities and in the theologies.
It was the playbook, right? I mean, that was the modus operandus, right, of the original concept was infiltration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if they perfected, this is what I'm thinking, if they perfected assimilation, co-option, and these techniques back then, well, they must be just masters of it now.
How can anybody doubt it? How can anybody doubt it? Look at what Monsanto is doing right now. Look at what, in the back of the Atlantis book, for instance, I have a chronology that is compiled by the author Valdemar Valerian, and it appeared first in his Matrix books. And he gave me permission to use this incredible chronology that makes up a good part of my Atlantis book, and there was a lot of humming and hawing as to whether or not this should be added to the book, and I absolutely believe that it should be, because it's one of the most incredible documents anyone would want to read, and it focuses on I think it's from 500 AD all the way down to the present, and it focuses on the British East India Company, you see, in the Hudson Bay Company and the spice trade. And it specifically also focuses on the distribution and the manufacture, and then the retail, just making available mercury, sugar, coffee, and tobacco, the major stimulants that you find in our society. And through 1,000 years, Val Valerian had just basically, charted the pervasiveness and the effects and the ill effects, and many of the people behind the purveyance, you see, and the manufacture of these stimulants. And anyone who looks at that, and anyone who looks at, the great groups like Monsanto and, say, even the Allied Fruit Company over in America, or whatever, and looks at these grand corporations and what they've been up to, if you track those back to the great spice trades, if you go and look even in cities, like dock cities especially, maybe not so Paris, because Paris, of course, is inland, but if anyone went to a major city like Cadiz, or a city that was like Barcelona that's on the coast, or say Stockholm or Gothenburg, you see, or Belfast, or Southampton, what have you, and just look at the buildings around there, and look at the docks, and look at the bonding houses, and get an eye, study this whole maritime trade that was happening not so long ago. You can easily see that through the whole purveyance of foodstuffs, even, which is environmental, isn't it? I mean, it comes from farms, doesn't it? The whole idea of putting chemicals on the land, and even the treatment of the animals, all of this ties in. So we have, you see, I believe that people are sort of becoming a little bit aware of this manipulation now. They've got to realize that this kind of manipulation has been going on from the advent of the agricultural age.
It also, it seems that in the perfection of this skill of theirs, they have also been able to get the, I would believe, the majority of the players in all this. Now, a lot of times you'll look at this and you'll see all the media involvement, you'll see all the different peoples, and you think, oh, there's hundreds of thousands of people that must be involved in this. This must be the most massive conspiracy that you can think of. But the way I see it from observation is that most of these people, most of the people that are actually doing the work that are involved are just as duped as anyone else is, or even more so. As it is said, the lie is different on every level. They completely believe that what they're doing is their job, and that there's nothing more to it than that, and that there isn't any major conspiracy because they've never been, brought into any major conspiracy. For instance, the BBC reporter, I mentioned this in the other show with Ben, the BBC reporter where she's saying, building number 7 has collapsed, and it's still in the photograph behind her. Did you see this one?
No.
Well, the BBC is reporting that building number 7 has collapsed, due to structural whatever their lame excuse was. Well, in the photograph behind her, you can still see building number 7 standing up just fine. And when you check the timing of this report to the time that the building actually fell, this was a 20-minute trigger-happy response before the building actually fell. Someone told them.
What about the one where Bush is telling you he's seen it on television and the thing hadn't even been televised yet anywhere in the world?
Exactly.
So see, this doesn't convince anybody, does it?
Maybe even Bush is just one of these, hapless players that doesn't really get, in on the script at all either. I wouldn't doubt that for a second. There's no doubt about that. No, don't doubt it. Don't doubt it. I do believe that he's not as dumb as he's made to look. That's my theory. Anyway, I think it's scary. I think it's scary to think that Bush is maybe not as stupid as he appears.
It's not about, I've always said in my work that it is never about whether they're stupid or intelligent, as about whether they're psychotic or they're normal. Yeah. This is what people have to look for. It becomes very condescending, to always, and probably this is why they set this guy up, is so that it would happen that people who, looked at this guy and all of his faux pas and whatever, and got into this kind of mild vanity game where they're accusing him of being an idiot. And of course this did get picked up by the media, and it did take its own life. And of course intelligent people like what you're saying are going to think, well, hang on, how could a man from, Yale University who's, graduated and whatnot, and
even
all these other...
Even if he only did get a C, I still think that, for instance, he would really mess his lines up if he, was that much of a... he's not, all that together.
But did they want us to think this?
I think so.
Yes, I think people who've lowered the level. Yeah, exactly. The people who've lowered the literacy level, the people who are purposely lowering the intelligence, quotient of the people, down even the newspapers are for 8th grade. It's perfect to put on a president who emulates this gung-ho, sort of ordinary, semi-literate guy. That's what they want. This is what they feel like. They don't care if the head man is in fact an idiot, because remember, government is mostly the people behind the scenes who you don't see, or the camera is not so concerned about.
Yeah, and the Bush thing to me was really quite obvious. What has really got me thinking a lot is this fairly obvious co-option of Gaia theory and the Green Movement. When you see the Al Gore thing, that's just absurd. The guy has, oil dripping out of his pockets, and he won't even answer questions about the tribe that has said they will commit suicide if Occidental comes and continues what they're doing, and they have the military supporting Occidental in that territory, shooting natives, and and he won't say a thing about this, and he's out there on stage about global warming, doing the parade. And to me, that's just such an obvious thing. It's really difficult for a lot of people, because especially a lot of very, you got to say naive environmentalists, because they really want to believe that this is a big effort, and people are starting to wake up, and we're really making changes and things like this.
Well, you see, as I've said on this matter many times before, that it's vital to the controlling interests that psychology, or the study of psychology, never reaches the shores of America. And don't get me wrong, what they're teaching over there when it comes to psychiatry is not the psychology I'm talking about.
Right.
Psychiatry is a whole other game, another, huge problem. But So what they've done, these politicians and people like that, is that they are focusing the mass attention and through PBS, just like the same way the BBC has done it. Through the PBS for the last 10, 15 years, they've been pushing this quote-unquote green message. Again, much of it is legitimate, but a lot of it, they only need to do a 70-30 split to move a political agenda ahead, you see. So now everybody's been drip-fed with this, woe is us, the planet is in great danger, people are living unsustainably. And you see, as I say, a lot of this is also, based on a certain amount of fact. But when they upscale it and upgrade it to the level where a major politician is just blathering a lot of nonsense to get the whole PBS, lefty generation, all, goggle-eyed over this, then you know that something is very seriously wrong. My reading of it is that none of these politicians are ever interested in ecology. They're only interested in psychology and the manipulation of the herd in exactly the same way that David Icke talked about the sheepdog, which also goes back to what you were asking 5 minutes ago about how is it that it's, not everybody knows, not everybody's cognizant, you see, of the fact that there's a wider conspiracy, even when there happen to be one of the cogs in the wheel of it, is because they are just a small cog in the wheel. They are just one cow amongst a vast herd with a few sheepdogs, you see, moving them in whatever direction they want. And it's presumptuous to imagine that, the individual will ever even wake up to any of this because, there's certain internal and external things that debar them from doing that. But again, get back to the main point. The individuals in America who control the world system absolutely want people to be as extrovert, that means in psychological terms as other-directed as possible. And therefore you will have any type of, clowning and Punch and Judy type of show and any kind of, shenanigans and any kind of capering through the media and every other kind of thing going on, including wars and including all manner of interesting, bread and circuses to keep people's attention purely and external. I believe that there is danger to our environment and that the environmentalist movement is based on certain, truisms and all of that. Like many things, it's a natural concern, so you go and you let expert scientists and people who know what they're doing fix it. That's a whole different category of information than what is then politicized, what is mediacized, and what is cut up again into these little packages for everyone to sort of get into and sample. And again, it's not one, it's, check out, the passage down through time, even the last couple of decades. There's always been some ism or some ology or something that's out there that is, new on the block and is a big social, meme that is now needed to be, everybody gets behind and everybody parades behind. Once upon a time it was communism. What happens now if it's environmentalism? It's all the same garbage in the end of the day. Freedom, apartheid has ended, the wall has come down, Ireland is free. No, wait, it's, South Africa has got its freedom and everybody, sprouting and talking nonsense just a couple of years ago about global diversity and all this wonderful, the global village. And what do we have now through the last two, Bushes? Nothing but wall-to-wall belligerence and war. You see, So it's just contradiction after contradiction. But it works if the sum result is that the human being loses his own foothold, loses his own sense of, core, his center, basically.
Yeah.
But he does it because he absolutely believes that his energy needs to be focused outside. He's a totally hypnotized chicken. They do the merry dance and the sorcerers of the world, they do their hypnotics, and everyone's attention is again focused out to some peril, or some trauma that ties back into the very nature of the ego itself that loves to continue to troubleshoot problems in order to vindicate its own existence. And the people in control at the top of the pyramid, they know exactly how to do this, and they even know how to get certain personality types.
Exactly.
After all, after all, don't we know through the revelations of people like Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor, you see, and the Arizona Wilders, that a lot of these politicians who then don't change and don't balk the system have already been compromised in secret rituals, maybe involving, you see, homosexuality or pedophilia, in order to make sure that they will never ever speak up later on when they're handed that, that it's like the mafia, once the bigger boys hand you your assignment, let's say, you may in fact have enough morality to say, listen, I don't want to be doing any of this. And this has happened in the past. But of course now they've compromised you, because if you've ever joined one of the fraternities, it goes way past hazing, it goes way past finding your personal little foible. They've actually got you on film. They've actually going to destroy your reputation in the media for the slightest thing. They've done this. This is the history of doing this. They stay quiet, and they, unfortunately, are totally compromised, and we should never ever forget that it is a control that's born out of fear and born out of vice on a very, very profound and deep level, in exactly the same way as we have it on the street level. It's just this in the ivory tower that this stuff has been going on.
Well, I definitely see where you're coming from there too, and on a much smaller level, without the blackmail and the pulling someone down into the darkness so deep they can't retreat. But the average people that are doing the work of the corporations, that are doing the work for the environment, but for a non-profit organization that is really actually funded by Rockefellers or something like that, for instance, but they believe in the environment. Nobody wants to give up their paycheck. When you're working for the company, you're not going to question the company's motives, because nobody wants to give up their paycheck. Or even if they do question them, I know many people who completely don't believe in the company they work for, and they understand that the companies that they work for are involved in all kinds of dirty politics and dirty business and all these things like that. But they, in a sense, accept the tainted. They accept that their food is coming from a tainted source, but they go, I have to pay my rent, I have to feed my kids, and where else am I going to work? And they're all like this anyway, and all these different excuses that people give. You follow me? I mean, I think that there's these little hooks, and then there's the big hooks, but everyone's being hooked and pulled, and all the same triggers. It's all the same triggers, like you're saying: fear, losing your position, losing your status. Even if your status is just one little rung on the ladder, you don't want to give up that one little rung on the ladder and go two down, or just like screw this ladder, I'm taking a walk, which I think everyone should do. But so everyone has a hold of these different little parts they don't want to give up. That's
right. I've had that. I've seen that, in my own family. I've seen it in my friends.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a combination of apathy. Yeah, sure. It's a combination also of great subconscious trepidation, which again is manufactured by the external world to make people think in terms of lack. All right. That fear that comes across the television, all that fear about economy and shaky economy and potential disasters, you see, this scares people into thinking, where will I get another job? Oh my God, woe is me, I've got to be very, very careful. And I mean, this ties into the whole mystical psychology of how a person thinks regarding their entire prosperity. And I don't just mean in a more limited way of, earnings and whatnot, but I mean in totality, because it all hangs together. People have been traumatized in the truly deep meaning of that word. We just don't think so, because normally you see a traumatized person somewhere on a gurney being wheeled into a casualty ward, or some person from a wreck or whatever. That's what we imagine is a trauma situation, and we don't even see it walking around the streets unless you're highly sensitive, and you can bloody well feel it, and then that's a whole different subject matter. But I can assure you that most people walking around in the world today are deeply traumatized. They can barely hold the jobs that you're describing, the ones that they've got.
Right.
Because on those 2 to 3 days off, it's a case of medication and alcoholism and so many other little, avoidances and calamities that are going on in their private lives. Never forget that, you got the person who's working, and that same worker, and I've had this from the horse's mouth in exactly the same way you just described there about people.
Yeah.
I've had it from the horse's mouth also, that people sometimes don't even want to go home. They don't want to be alone. They want to head down to the pub and the bar and even hang with a lot of people they don't really like, just to avoid being alone of an evening, you know what I mean? Or even have the lights off. We're living in a super extroverted, outer-directed world in which people actually very much want to go to work because it's better than, the other. So it's the situation in which, Patrick McGowan, for instance, showed in The Prisoner, in which everyone wants that number. They're absolutely happy to be a pawn, because there's even a certain amount of sadism. I believe there's sadism as a core aspect of the human psyche. And there's just enough sadism to have people in a managerial or sub-managerial position where they can nag and bicker and have a little bit of power over some other guy that they can kick out the door, some Mexican they can push around, at work and, give orders to, or some little naive, timid person they can sort of, flirt with and destroy their lives. There's enough. See, we got to look at the fact that the big boys at the top are sadistic and tyrannical and whatnot. But I have with my own eyes seen equal, if not more tyranny, more passive aggression, you know, in Stanford Mall where I used to work in America, you know, and in other places when I worked retail, you know, and walked around the streets and did common labor.
Yep.
You know, I don't know if it was just me, my own eyes that have been trained to see this, but I saw it everywhere. And I don't mean in the fat cop who comes along to give you a ticket for no personal reason, you know, the particular, you know, scenarios or situations. In which most, exactly, not the most obvious. I'm talking about in the least obvious, in the way that people even treated their animals, in the way people treated their front garden. We're back to, you know, environmentalism again, or we're back to conservationism again. And what is conservation? Conservation, using one plastic cup and then chucking it away, getting 2 straws and then throwing it away when you barely take a sip out of a cup. Take a walk down any American boulevard and you'll see the opposite. You'll see, I don't give a damn what the Gores of the world are screaming, or you know, or the bigger questions.
Yeah.
Let's look at the lack of conservation, and the lack of environmentalism in the most small things. You know, look at the way people treat their bodies, all the way up to the psychic sadism that people have perpetrated on themselves, and then all the way down to the bottom of just even what they eat. So again, it comes back to the old thing, that if you want to go and buy all that GMO and all of that stuff, and if you want to get your petrol from, you know, BP and from Esso or Exxon or whatever, and you want to buy the Monsanto, you know, Frankenfoods, you are the tyrant. Stop blaming the people upstairs. They create some garbage, you're eating it, you're paying for it.
Yeah.
So, you see, this is the thread that I see, which is the continuation of, yes, there is definitely 100% the sorcery going on from on high. And the big problem, everybody's scratching heads and going, what are we going to do about that? Well, what you do about it is the secret is just like almost a chakra thing. It's almost like a Kabbalistic thing. The head is reflected in the bottom. The 1 is reflected in the 10. The upper is reflected in the lower. You know, even Joseph Campbell pointed this out when he did his schemata of the chakras, in which the highest chakra, something about the highest chakra, is in fact emulated and present, perhaps in a different form, of course, in the lowest chakra. The yin-yang, in the black is the white, in the white is the black. So, you see, the tyrant's face is in some sense a reflection of everyone's individual face. And that's why my message is not so much political, it's always going to be psychological, and it always will be. Because even though I see all of these political and then social and environmental, sociological phenomena, I understand that it's like, you know, radiating from a central battery, a central core, a central crystal. And what goes into that crystal is the psyche of man. It's man's thinking. But it's just because our children have never been trained this way. We ourselves have never been trained this way. The last book that anyone will ever pick up is a book on psychology. We know that. So therefore, we are running ignorant. And we are able to then be led by these sheepdog, some with a smile and some with a bark, in whatever direction, you know, they want to take us.
But within that is our most positive message, you know, is that, yes, we're being manipulated. We've been manipulated since the beginning of time, practically, if you count just the beginning of time of civilization. But when you see it, that it takes our complicity, it takes our involvement, our giving away of our power, well then that just means that you still have it to give, you know. I get stuck on this, but when I see them working so hard to, in a sense, now to turn the human into the pathogen, and the human needs to be controlled, well, how are we going to get that turned around and bring it back into a holistic process? Or can we do this individually? I believe we can, but can we step out of this stream, you know, and start our own offshoots or directions while the rest of it kind of screams off the cliff? But what do you think of that?
Well, we were talking about this before, and it's the most important question of our age. And it's important that this kind of question is always posed to those who pretend to be teachers or whatever, because it's really going to be the bottom line, isn't it? Because it's okay to be able to state the problems. I don't think it even takes much of a genius to be able to spot the problems. You know, any armchair critic can do that just by turning on the television. The problem is, how do you remedy it? How do you track it back so that you remedy it? And you remedy it in a way that's also very organic and natural, and clear to anyone, that you don't have to have some sort of, letters after your name or some PhD to be able to solve this problem. It's the same concept in science. It's the same concept in change almost anywhere. It's always, been grassroots people who have been very, filled with humanism, the Max Gersons, the Raymond Royal Rifes, it's been ordinary grassroots kind of people who have had the greatest impact in our world. And for every evil, rotten thing that you've got, be it the AMA or the FDA or the IRS or whoever, you always have the alternative. And I always have found that in this great game, because I do believe it's a game between them and us, the people who are the sorcerers, but we're also the mannequin in a way. When this mannequin starts to, and as we are now, that's why I feel personally optimistic, is because we are in an age, remember, when people are getting it, waking up for the first time. Not that they've been awakened before. You see, I always maintain that now is the only age in which anyone in the collective has a chance to get around this information. However, getting back to your point more, me personally, and I may be wrong in this, it's just personal. I don't believe in a we. I don't believe in a we, an us, or an our at all. In fact, I'm very suspect when those words are being used in any kind of solution concept. Because when you talk psychology, when you're a person like myself who always, advocates the psychological, sort of remedy or solution type of basis, and that's not to say that other people's solutions are not equally valid or whatever.
Right.
But I specifically always bring up, a psychological, I don't bring up too much of a spiritual one or a religious one or a theological one. I'm not Tony Blair running around going, if all faiths can just get the, Jesus, you'd have to have faith to believe in a guy like that. He's right in one way. But, I don't have that kind of, mindset in which it's going to be, I'm pretty unhappy with the way philosophy, and I'm talking about academic philosophy here, has gone. They've presided no answers about anything really of substance. Theology, forget that. So even Eastern mysticism, I'm no big fan of that. So, we're looking into, even though I make studies of all of these things, and it's wonderful to study all of this, my solutions are always purely psychological. But as soon as you start talking about that, any type of solution thing is of a psychological basis or nature, then you're speaking only about the individual. You only can speak about the individual psyche. This is the difference between a Freud and his nephew Bernays, for instance, to illustrate the point. If you're Sigmund Freud, you're talking about the individual. If you're Bernays, you skew what is being said and you start talking about collectivized groups. And anyone who studied these two men knows which one is the absolute monster here, because, Bernays twisted and turned psychology, and he wasn't the only one, of course. What did he do? He made it for the collective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the true Freudian model, the true Jungian model is always individual. And if this resonates to those who are on a mystical path, who've also heard that it's about an individual, change, so be it. That's fine. It is. They're right. But of course, we have to be very wary, because all forms of mysticism, all forms of theology, be it Eastern or Western, is absolutely insinuated, Adam, with this whole concept of the us and the we and the our and what we're going to do. We have to listen to that. We have to gain an ear now to listen to this, because it's absolutely the work of the serpent. Any concept, and I mean any concept, that deals with an us, a we, and an our. And again, I preface this by saying that this is only my own take on it. But any concept that deals with the we, the us, or the our is highly suspect and will lead nowhere, because its ultimate fulfillment is politics, the very thing that you and I are, disgruntled about, and that the world is disgruntled about. It actually leads to politics. In other words, what is political action? Political action is the action of the we, the us, and the our. It's simple. They're two words for the same thing. So the individual action is the most powerful action of all. But you have to be an individual in order to act individually. Exactly. What has happened now, and what has been happening in the last so many decades, is the erasure, or the erosion of true independence, individuality, selfhood. Of course, we hear those words, particularly we hear the words independence and individuality every 5 minutes being screamed through the media. America, for instance, is always happy to tell you. I mean, the abuse of these words is just its own subject. I mean, you could do how many, radio interviews on that alone, the mere abuse of words like community,
Right.
relationship, independence, individuality. I mean, freedom. You could do a series on the abuse of the word freedom. It's so preposterous. But when we look at what
that one is, they should teach college courses on that one alone.
well, it's getting very dangerous because now hate group. I mean, we're getting terms. We're getting the prevalence of talismanic words. I tried to go into it in one of my DVDs, the one on subversive symbolism. But Jesus, I had to cut it short because this talismanic word thing is just unbelievable how it works in our society and how actually successful it is. But getting back to the main point, you see, the main point of your question is that I believe it is individual work. It always has been individual work. But we have been trained to think of the work of the individual as something relatively impotent, relatively meaningless, relatively redundant, sort of almost like not important.
Or even this idea lately, I've heard a lot of rhetoric, I mean, really direct rhetoric about, almost the selfishness of the individual. And a lot of the hive mind hype that I've heard a lot on media and different places, but that's a little more like in your face with it too.
Well, it all adds up. It's all part of the same, it's all part of the same poison. It's all part of the same virus. Yeah. And if you were to interview people like Nikki Rapana, people who've really deeply looked into the whole, future of mankind in the sense of the global village, which she is an expert on. I mean, she's been on Jeff Rent's. I've got links on my forum to Nikki Rapana's marvelous interviews. Again, very much in the tradition, you see, of those who believe that the communist experiment is not at all faded away. It's just been revamped. It's been insinuated now. The communist experience of how to control societies was an experiment that happened in Russia, but it's actually now been transmuted fully, a full package, and now it's trying to be inserted into the sociology of the Western mind. I do believe this. I believe you can see evidence of it, and it ties very much in with the whole electronic thing, the RFID cards that are on their way, and all of these things that people are afraid of, like various forms of identification cards, implants, different modalities of the cashless society. What we have to understand is that all has to be framed in the global village concept. You can't just point to one individual thing, or even cell phones, you see, and tracking and what's that, GPS, and all of these things that we've dealt with in the latest DVD, and we're going to be doing more on this subject. This all is part of a predicted global village that was, very much on the mind of even Sir Francis Bacon and people before him. The people who, even for people who don't know, the term utopia actually is an invented word, and the only definition for the word meant no place. So if it means no place, then the indication is it was never meant to be a physical in its inception. The no place is a digital kingdom. It's a no place, meaning that, again, like the digital, like the internet, like all of the kind of cyber technotopia that's coming, we're going to be soon in a prison, but it's going to be a prison, without walls. This is what they've wanted. And people have to be ever mindful of this, because the experiment may have been in the Soviet bloc or whatever, but it was U.S. money, and it was British money, and it was secret society money that funded and perpetrated this. The leaders of the communist movement all had houses, and all were residents in America before they made their way to the Soviet Union. See, this has all been documented. And now the experiment that went on there for 40, 50 years or so has just been moved in package over here. So
Clinton was fairly tied into that, wasn't he?
They all were. There's not a
his
politician who wasn't.
He spent a lot of time in Russia, and he had some really interesting connections to, I think, this story that you're talking about.
And particularly the Rockefellers. You have to look even behind the scenes of the normal presidents, but look back to, even rat as he was, Winston Churchill, look even in his memoirs and how he warned the West about this, first of all, he warned about the German-Russian alliance, which, or more specifically the Stalin-Hitler alliance, which he was very much afraid was a very bad sign, and he was right. And then, of course, later on, he warned about the communist threat, but see, the communist threat has revamped itself into the Russian mafia now, which is not something that has a short history. The mafia coming out of Odessa and out of the Pale of the Jews in just south of Moscow, a gigantic settlement, one of the largest ghettos in the world, which was always involved in white slavery and opium dealing and all sorts of pernicious stuff. You see, this whole mob now is ensconced in America. It's part of the reason why America's industry is destroyed. But
it seems like it could be kind of almost the bleakest concept that you could think of, is that well, whether it would be the communist connections, or then you could take, like we were talking about, environmental connections. But basically, they could almost take any formation of civil group of any kind, and it all gets twisted and turned into the direction of this kind of overriding agenda, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with communist, environmentalist, or anything.
Right. These are only the Hydra. These are only the heads of the Hydra.
Right.
It might be very difficult for people to actually see what the main agenda is. I always refer to it simply, in the most simple way, without elaboration, as the war on consciousness.
Yeah, in that direction of understanding that it is truly a war on consciousness. But this is where I was coming, was trying to conceive of, and this is my most positive thought of this, is that if it was that easy for them, well, they would have been done with it back when right after they killed the last druid, right? They'd have got, okay, job's over, we got it all wrapped up. So this obviously this whole process takes this maintenance. This whole process takes the years and years and years and hundreds of years of driving it, pushing it, every time getting a little deeper, every time getting a little further. But it does take this maintenance, right? And so if it takes this maintenance, that means they're fighting down, they're holding down. This is where I'm trying to see our power. That we can, rise up with, is that they're holding all this back, but they really got their finger in one hell of a dam, I would assume. There's some strength there, no?
Well, they're not strong.
No, that's what I'm saying. Within us is the strength that they're holding down.
Yes, but then you have to see the only thing that is positive is the observation of the enemy. When people talk about, what's positive about any of this, is the observation and the discovery, which is now, I'm glad to say, going on, of the fact that you now know that there is a parasite among you. You see, it's like right. The table of 12, not realizing there's a Judas. It's like a criminal conspiracy in which you don't even know, who the element is. And remember, it's often a culprit, a perpetrator, a predator within the body politic. This, of course, taken to its fullest concomitant, it's about the genes, again, that we all contain an alien DNA, so it's very easy for people of a stronger alien persuasion to work on us, because we have something of them inside of us. I mean, there's so many ways to look at this. But more akin to what you were talking about is to see, yes, it is very difficult for these people, and that's why it has taken so long. Because remember, the world was a very different, kind of world, even 100 years ago, when our fathers worked on the fields, and died in mines and died in factories. And just pushed horses and plows on the fields, to move us into the new age where the technologies are now restored and so on. But these people, they have had great successes as well. But they're ruthless and they're psychotic. So if they ever feel that they're up against something that, does get in the way of their plan, be it the biggest plan or a plan that's just more pragmatic, they will destroy, mutilate, and murder to forward their goals. It's like, obviously, this thing with Iraq falls into that same category. It's only part of a greater plan, but in order to move the plan forward, look how ruthless they have been.
Yeah.
So it's been like that all down through civilization. Yes, they targeted the Druids and wiped them out. That was a huge, positive success for them. That's always been something that's a marked, success. That's why they did it. They had a very, very clear understanding that if such people existed, not a single one of their acts of sorcery would have continued, you see. Not one of their monstrous paradigms or any of their cities, these ugly, filthy, rotten cities that people think are so wonderful and normal, or any of the kind of farming, you see, or any of the relationships that we have to nature would simply not have been permitted by people who were in tune with the earth and who knew what was what. I mean, just cut it right down to there.
Yeah.
They certainly would not have been able to work on the human mind, which is a form of attack that has happened since the advent of the cities, and since man has been, clustered in these awful towns and cities. The next step then is to work on them as one herd, indistinguishable of class or, creed or whatever, anything else. They all come under the one leash at that point. Well, that also wouldn't have been, permissible. It wouldn't have been possible with a kind of a priestarchy that knew what was going on and who warned its people about this kind of thing. You see, but then, of course, the earth catastrophes, the physical catastrophes that just happened on the earth that traumatized people, happened at the same time as these great conflicts, between the Nephilim, between the Lemurians or the Atlanteans or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
so it was
wars.
a combination of all things that were happening at the same time has actually helped, because that traumata that fractured the ego is the central thing to understand when you're talking about solutions to the problem. Because if your patient is already basically psychotic and only held together with the thinnest glue, and that any kind of trauma, any even minor trauma, can split his consciousness again, you've got the perfect mannequin. You've got the person who can be completely controlled, you see. And unfortunately, maybe it wasn't their cause that did it. They didn't cause this, but it's a byproduct of the age of catastrophe. It's a byproduct of the splitting of consciousness. That person is now so existentially weak, so psychologically impotent and infirm, that of course they're going to believe in all this Christian crap and this Judaic rubbish and this Arab, what do you call it, this Islamic nonsense, or any of the other religions and all the other little splinter groups. And look at all the sects and cults and bullshit that's in our world. This, from the Jim Jones stuff all the way up to whoever, right the way up to the most, in my ideas, the whole Judeo-Christian thing couldn't be a more sinister, edifice. But why does it exist? It exists because people in a state of almost complete and utter blindness believe literally that the Pope is some sort of holy person, or that, Jesus is going to come back and save their ass or something like that. So we're dealing with people, you see, who are equally, maybe that's wrong to say equally, but I would say, almost as insane as the people at the top of the pyramid. So getting back to your point, where has there ever been a true, and I mean true, adjusted, spiritualized normalcy, that any of the other stuff can be read as antithetical or adversarial? Is not the entire world psychopathic and basically sadistic and wrapped up in... So the only time that my message uses the we, or addresses people as a collective, is to say, I'll tell you where you're collective. I'll tell you why my message goes out to you all. People are in a dire state of absolute... And it wouldn't even matter whether you had an Illuminati praying over your ass, or, sadistic royal families or warmonger. The state that you're in is, like Plato said, subhuman. The job of religion, the job of any true spirituality, was to try and get you from the subhuman level up to the human level. And you are people who want to find out what the angels are doing and what God might be doing? Yeah. How dare you, said Plato. Think first, or Socrates said through the symposium, can we agree that the way man acts towards his brother, the way he acts towards the women, the animals of the world, the way he acts to the nature of the world, which we talk about the true conservation, is subhuman in exactly the same way if you watch the end of the movie The Green Mile, or so many other films you see that deal with this, that basically shows you the kind of suffering and horrendousness and sadism that is operating in our world. Man is already, and I believe that is partly through artificial, reasons that he's been suppressed. But let's leave that aside for a moment. The fact of the matter is that I don't care what level of profession the person's at, no matter what qualifications they've got, no matter what type of academic status they have. I don't give a damn what collar they got around their neck and what church they come from. Everyone I see, with only extremely few exceptions, those you can count on the fingers of half a hand, are in a state of pathology or psychically, deranged people. So, and it doesn't take much to see this when you're really cold about it and you really look at what people are about and what they're doing and what they talk about and the kind of nonsense that they're into, okay? This is calling a spade a spade. It is no wonder then that in a pathological, recalcitrant situation like that, that ghouls, specters, ghosts, monstrosities, all manner of vile things start emanating. It's exactly the same thing you'd expect from a boneyard. I've seen vultures hopping in India where they have, the abattoirs and the boneyards are outside. They don't even have them covered up. Anything dead, they just throw in a gigantic, really huge, sometimes stretching over acres of just the most rotting, stinking. In fact, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, actually seeing that kind of thing. And what did I see hopping on the top of all of that? Well, there's the vultures and there's the carrion crows. And it's never ever, I've never forgotten about that because I see it in exactly the same way when I look at this, the world in which we're living. So if you have these George Bushes and if you have these popes and if you have these, black popes and if you have all of these monsters, and we know their biographies, people like myself, we study them, we talk about them, all over our websites and in our books and stuff like that. But if you see individuals like this, and if you see them even in the average schoolyard, And if you see these people even at your place of work, in the most, all around you, some people that are just, so ridiculous and so sadistic and whatnot, it is not because they are some freak, just person that fell from the sky. Yeah. They are an outgrowth of a very, very toxic situation. And therefore, the only way that an individual can change that situation is to change themselves. There's no we about it at all. You have to, just like I've always used this analogy in the movie Nostradamus, when the whole city he's in, and it's been a while since I've seen the movie, so I can't remember where he was exactly, but plague has come to the entire city, and everyone is dying, and also everyone has gone kind of mad, so they're running around with insanity, you see. And what does he do? He goes over by the well, he strips himself off completely naked, and he brings up the, the clean water that's still clean from this well, and he washes himself off. And the camera pulls back because it wants to give you, the makers of the movie are trying to communicate to you an incredible metaphor here. And that metaphor is a real metaphor. And that is that no matter how bizarre, and believe me, just need to watch MTV and you'll find out that we're pretty bizarre. You just need to watch what's coming out of Hollywood and you think, how more weird can it get, right?
Yeah.
Or you have to watch it and you go downtown and listen to what people are talking about any given weekend. You can pretty tell me it's bizarre, all right? So here we are, and you're in the middle of this. You're in the middle of this absolute chaos where people are pretty much teetering on the edge of total pathology, total insanity. And, even a lot of the people have known this for a long time, so they're on medication. It's all over. They're self-murdered or whatever, description you want to give to it. The only answer is to do this concept, like this Nostradamus character was doing, and that is find the well, find the still spot point. Right. Find the, center, water, which you have within yourself, or as Joseph Campbell would have said, find your bliss, and go there. And it can be many things that bring you to there, but it will not be the same for Michael as it will be for Adam. It will not be the same for the person who's listening to us right now as it will be to their neighbor. It'll be different. Don't expect a one-size-fits-all, A to Z sort of, directory as to how to do this. This is the beauty of the shamanic way. It's the beauty of the individual way. And that is that, it's individual. There was one crazy horse. There was one Jesus Christ. There was one Buddha. You know what I mean? There was one Merlin. There was one King Arthur. Why is it one? Because that's the whole message of history, is that it's the individual. So anytime that you hear the we, the us, and the our, particularly, of course, it goes without saying, when you hear it coming from a major situation in which, like, say, we were using Gore as an example there with this new little clique, this new little thing. Yeah. What is that? That's another we, our, us. That's another man, another animus figure, another godlike figure, another priest, another sorcerer, you see, standing up on stage, waving his wand, talking about some traumatic thing. So number one, he's leading you away from your personal consciousness. It's always an external, they want your money, they want your checks, they all want you to focus on some external, global issue. So don't look at the psyche. Number two, right. He is a steadying archetype, or because he represents the father archetype, they pick a man, pick a politician who will, have those characteristics. Not that he has the faintest idea, he's just some egomaniac loving the ride, but, the people who are controlling him, they would know all this, they would understand all of this psychology, whether he's aware of it or not is a whole other point. And thirdly, it's absolutely collective, because people get together in collectives for one very simple reason. And this goes to the heart of everything you've been talking about. What is the main key? What is the main problem? What's the main solution? Here it is. People go towards collective things. They're attracted towards collective things because they're deeply insecure inside. Therefore, you lean on your brother. It's you need to lean on people now because you're terribly dependent. You're the opposite of independent. Independent, as I said, a talismanic word that's used, it has no validity anymore. And therefore, there's a reason why people want to sit there in these mass audiences. You see, there's reason why they want to sign on to all this nonsense, no matter what it is. There's a reason why they play the political game, even when they know, as you yourself have said, that it leads bloody nowhere except to more chaos, you see. It's all rooted in the psychology of people having no longer any ego centrality, no egocentricity. That's all been shattered and broken. There's many reasons as to why that is, and they all need to be studied. And when people are that weak, that solitary, they're going to run into marriages, they're going to run into collective action. They're going to run away from themselves. And as soon as society, any of these, figures, these people who are playing the archetypes, present something to you again, You know, like, it really can be people as preposterous as George Bush, or as preposterous as John Hagee, you know, in the Christian movement, or as preposterous as Billy Graham and all the tribe of people like that, you know, and they just have to put on a smile, and they just have to talk in a certain way, and believe me, people are going to be gaga. And the reason is they're running headlong from themselves. They have no inner core whatsoever. It's gutted. It's like a cemetery in there. And so the answer is to turn that around. The answer is to try and give people some awakening to this, and hope you can't give it to anyone anyway. It has to come from inside, but at least you can present the signpost that says, look, this kind of action that you're involved in leads to disaster. Let me show you how. I can show you the message of the past, and I can show you the message of what's going on in our world today, and I can present the evidence that shows you that this kind of action, this kind of political action, is nowhere. And I can show you that this kind of psychological action is far greater, both for yourself in the short term and for the world, you know, in the larger term. A teacher can show that. He can try through his life to demonstrate these facts and draw on the proofs and evidences for this. But whether or not the world get it, or whether the world, you know, buy into that, is absolutely their own affair. It is, you know, because believe me, it doesn't matter. If people want to play this game, if they want to have all of this stuff coming down, then by all means they can have, and they can deserve the tragedies that befall. I am no pessimist. I don't care about that. If this is the road that men have to go on towards destruction, then so be it. Somewhere it is written in the natural order that that will happen, and there'll be a new order to come out of this, you know, this defunct world. There'll be a new growth, a new order of things in a more natural way. You know, I don't look at it as being a bad thing at all. Whatever is broken, whatever is bad, in the end it needs to be trashed. Yeah. So people have the opportunity and they have the choice to change, and it's up to them. And if they don't want to do it, then fine. Then we'll have a world that just descends into further and further debauchery and chaos. But I'm all right with that, you see. Let it happen, if it's meant to be.
Of its own, it would come to its final conclusion. Like you were saying before, I mean, I've always said it as any path that is not a path of life is a dead-end road, and eventually it will self-extinguish itself. And you were saying earlier in another talk about that nature is self-healing, and that if you look at it in a natural history kind of perspective, really hasn't been going on that long. So when people think, well, when's it going to end? You know, it really hasn't been here that long. So its natural end, it could be literally around the corner. That doesn't mean we are going to experience it maybe within the next 100 years or so, but that's really just a flicker in the length of time that we're actually talking about.
Well, I believe that, you see, there is a significance about the year 2012 and this, at least the countdown period to that time, and it has to do with the fact that there is a lot to worry about, but that the only people who have a lot to worry about are the George Bushes and the sorcerers, and even on the street level, the people who have not done their spiritual homework. I absolutely believe that we've already entered that time. And from the kind of, you know, reactions that I've been seeing, even in people in the last 10 years, since even the mid-90s, and I can even take it back a little bit more than that, but certainly up until, especially from my experiences, certainly I've seen since 2000, let's just go from there. Right. There has been dramatic changes in the lives of the people that, you know, are no good. I mean, the people who've been doing evil, who've been cutting corners, who've been avoiding their, you know, responsibilities and avoiding their inner homework and so on. I do believe that there has been a shift already, and it's going to increase and increase and increase down the line. And a lot of the things that we're seeing on the governmental side are sort of reactions to this. You know, people can be asked, you can get into astrology or whatever terminology you want to account for all of this. But I believe there's a phase shift that has taken place, and it's going to continue, that our world is going to be radically transformed, radically different in just the next 4 to 5 years, absolutely. I already see it taking place, so in my mind there can be no doubt about it at all. And now with the planet Pluto entering the sign of Capricorn, it's just happened, so, you know, it's within the next 3 years, the four years, you see, which is the first phase of this. Mm-hmm. All astrological signs can be broken up into 3 sections of about 3 to 4 years each. And so we're just entering into the first period of this transit of Pluto through the sign of Capricorn, and that is going to be really drastic, right across the board. And Pluto is basically the, what you would call it, the Roto-Rooter. I don't know if you have them in France, but in America you got Roto-Rooter.
Well, I am American, so I know what you mean, right. That's for sure.
That's what Pluto is. He just comes with a gear and he goes, out of my way, put the overalls on, and he just unplugs all that, you know, gunk from your tubes, you know. And basically this is what Pluto's all about. Now, of course, what happens, of course, any homeopathic person knows this, I mean, even most doctors know this, that you're going to have a toxic reaction first. Now, as I said, we've been seeing this toxic reaction for approximately 5 to 10 years, but it's been getting stronger and stronger and stronger every year. There was a large shift around about 2007, late 2006, coming into 2007, all of 2007. I've just seen so many, you couldn't even, chronicle them, evidences of this. And now in 2008, the beginning, we have Pluto, the planet of this detoxification and this cleansing, entering into a very, very toxic sign, meaning that for sociology, for America, for the world, planet, the sign of Capricorn represents things that have a lot of, need to go through a lot of cleansing. So it's just it's just astrological jargon for something that is a natural cycle. Nature is already working through her agents, in other words, you know what I mean? And people can look at it on a biological level. The positive side to keep a focus on is the unbelievable amount of truth that is also becoming exposed. You just have to listen to some bands, the music alone, the stuff they're writing about, the amazing revelations, the amazing, I can't doubt it. Just look at my work.
That have opened.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Look at the work that I've been motivated to do. Do you think I planned any of this? It must be joking. People who know me know that just simply is not true. The Atlantis book was never planned. The whole work on the Irish origins wasn't planned. The new book is coming out in a couple of weeks on astrotheology. None of this stuff, was planned in that overt way where you sit down one day and you say, okay, here's my 5-year plan or whatever. And I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people.
I think especially in this field where, when you really start to look and you're just peeling back the layers, you can't stop digging, because you keep finding, and
that's right.
Any theory that's worth holding on to, it has to be a theory that continually reestablishes itself and gets stronger and stronger because of the more information that you're able to find that holds it up. Yeah. Otherwise, you find something that tears it apart. Well, let it go.
Let it go. And people should never forget that we call Mother Nature Mother for a reason. If a mother has taken her child to the grocery store or taken her child to the fair or whatever, and the child is just eating so much chocolate and like I used to do, eat packets and packets of chewing gum and then swallow the stuff because nobody's ever told you, to spit it out, all this kind of lunacy that kids get up to, right? Or whatever other kind of nonsense, candy floss all over the face and whatnot. The mother runs to the child and tries to, save it from itself. Because it just hasn't the faintest idea that it's just about to be dead, of the stupid things that it's doing, So, in a way, that's where we are right now. Mother Nature is saving her children.
So that is the first part of our conversation with Michael Tsarion. We will have 2 more parts after this, and they will each be about, roughly an hour long. So I should be posting the continuation of our conversation very soon. So as the Psychonautilus drifts off into the distance, I leave you with the music of James Songer. This is a piece entitled March of the Praying Mantis. Welcome to the Psychonautilus. Come this way, come this way, come this way. You are now on board an interdimensional research vessel. Prepare yourself for the unexpected. Our mission is truth. Our boundaries are unlimited. And the possibilities are infinite.
Well, I believe that, there is a significance about the year 2012, and this, at least the countdown period to that time, and it has to do with the fact that there is a lot to worry about, but that the only people who have a lot to worry about are the George Bushes and the sorcerers, and even on the street level, the people who've not done their spiritual homework. I absolutely believe that we've already entered that time. There has been dramatic changes in the lives of the people that, are no good. I mean, the people who've been doing evil, who've been cutting corners, who've been avoiding their, responsibilities and avoiding their inner homework and so on. I do believe that there has been a shift already, and it's going to increase and increase and increase down the line. And a lot of the things that we're seeing on the governmental side are sort of reactions to this. Positive side to keep a focus on is the unbelievable amount of truth that is also becoming exposed. And people should never forget that we call Mother Nature Mother for a reason. In a way, that's where we are right now. Mother Nature is saving her children. Mother Nature is saving her children. So one person can say, oh my God, woe is me, look at the world, look at the evil that pervades. And you get a lot of this. You get a lot of websites, you get a lot of fear-mongers. I certainly get inundated with emails and calls and, oh God's sake, all these people are just in a total state of paranoia. Well, you remember, when the mind is traumatized, it stops thinking. And even when it's mildly traumatized, it just avoids. So it's not that the average Joe today doesn't know that there's a sort of an alternative history movement out there, or that the web is not, full of amazing things that you can find out about history and religion. Of course, most people know that this stuff is going on. They listen to Alex Jones. They've heard David Icke. They just avoid it. They just switch off. They know it's there. They know there's information, but they're never going to buy a book. They're never going to turn it on. They're never going to listen, because it causes trauma to think that these guys are basically telling me on a subliminal level that everything I know is wrong. So either I laugh at them, make fun of them, which of course has happened in all of their lives, and has happened in my life as well. It doesn't bother me in the slightest, but it certainly has traumatized the hell out of David Icke, and I'm sure it doesn't bother Alex Jones. But that's just temperament, And also, I've done my homework. I'm sort of stronger because I've done my homework, and I know what I'm doing is right for me. And it just turns out other people want to hear about it. I've never gone out there hoping that people will be interested in what I've said. I've never had that desire. The people have come to me, of their own bat, and say, hey man, we're turned on by what you do. But it's not that I've ever made a career out of this kind of thing on purpose.
I think within that is why you've reached a lot of conclusions that were just out of reach for a lot of people, because I think there's so many people that may have found this before, but just would never say a thing,
Well, I meet those people now. A lot of them email me, and they want to be a silent minority, and they're very. And in fact, there's some of the things I've discovered, particularly that I put on the appendices pages for both books. Is sent to me by people, sent to me by some people who are very, very good at linguistics and etymology and all of this kinds of thing, in an alternative way, I must say. And we look into this, and we look at all of the. Because remember, again, this is in order to understand. Like I said, in order to understand the enemy, and you have to look at all the things that they're doing, is quite a broad subject. It's not one area. You cannot be a person who's just only, compartmentalized, you'll never see it. It's the same thing you brought up at the beginning when you said about how come people who are part of this don't know it. Well, the compartmentalization is the answer. This is something that requires a lot of spectrum, a lot of surveillance, a lot of ability to take, like a detective, like a Sherlock Holmes, to bring so many seemingly divergent, disconnected parts together and bring them together and form them into a new sort of jigsaw, a new kind of, a sculpture. Now, see, 99% of the people from within an academic circle, that's the least of the things that they can do.
No.
They may pretend that they're experts at this, but actually the facts of the matter is they're not. It's the Manuel Velikovskys that can do that, right? It's people on the outside of the, official think tanks and the officialdom. The official academic has no ability to do this as far as I'm concerned, nor does he have the inclination to do it, because he works in a system that will penalize him for doing so. So his attention is entirely focused on the subject that he's into, with occasionally a bit of, sidetracking. But for the most part, and this is provable from people within the system, the Leonard Schleins. Just read the opening introduction of Richard Milton's book, Shattering the Myths of Darwinism, and he addresses this. This has also been addressed by Leonard Schlein. It was addressed in the past by Arthur Koestler, some of the highest people up the totem pole within academia. So I'm not just throwing this out because I think this. I've read this from people within academia who've lamented this tremendous compartmentalization. Theodore Roszak, you see, from Berkeley. I mean, we have a lot of thinkers. Jacob Needleman. There's been so many people who've addressed this compartmentalization and the bane of it. So we're not going to be able, and of course, look, it's simple, isn't it? If we are society waiting for some goddamn linguist or waiting for some other expert from within academia to ever address the crimes of religion, to ever address what has been going on with secret societies and royal families, my God, we are going to have the longest wait, and we have been having the longest wait. So as far as I'm concerned, these people have no say in what is, considered an alternative field. That's what's called alternative. There wouldn't be an alternative movement, Adam, if these guys from academic had been doing their jobs.
And they should know better, because they obviously are following their, their cues. They're following their cues, and they're doing what they're told to keep their positions. And these are the people studying things, so they have to be putting a lot aside. They have to be setting it down and putting a lot aside. And
but the psychological motive for doing that is threat. Just in the same way that the ordinary man in the street will laugh at the David Ikes and laugh at me and all these things and turn it off or just avoid listening to what we're talking about, the academic world has a much higher quotient of threat, because they have the long strings of letters after their name. They're the ones whose knees are, been on the floor to the system. They're the ones who maintain the status quo. Their world is where the consensus is not only strong, but super strong. Mm-hmm. So how do you think they feel? These Oxford, Cambridge, Princeton, Cornell dudes who've climbed and slithered and Masonic hands shook their way up to the top of the ladder and have been given all the rewards. And believe me, those rewards are very, significant. Look at the Sorbonne in France, right? And I'm not talking about all people from within academia. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule. But the vast majority of these sycophants and these arrogant pretenders to knowledge is the threat when some individual without those letters on their name, you see, and people from outside of that start coming up with amazing things from within geology, from within linguistics, within racial studies, you see, or ethnology or archaeology, particularly geology, because most of the people that I read, you see, especially when I was compiling the Atlantis book, is a lot of geology and anthropology and archaeology. For instance, Michael Cremo, Richard Milton, Allen and Dallaire, etc. You see, so we have a bunch of people from within academic and also from outside. Barry Fell jumps to mind. I mean, the list is endless. These people are the biggest threat to these academics, and that is why, as yet, you haven't had a bunch of academics come along to endorse the, let's say, people in the alternative, research community. It's still the reason why you haven't heard of Ahmed Osman and even Ralph Ellis and Mustafa Gadala. Those are three writers who, I don't know what's in their own head, but as far as I'm concerned, they're not from within the strict academic world, right? They are alternative people. I mean, most of their readership would be an alternative readership. Yet their works are monumental as to what they've discovered about Egypt and Akhenaten and so on. Yet those people have yet, I don't see Discovery Channel or History Channel, you see, or any channel running to give millions to these people, nor will it ever happen. So, here's the predicament that we're in, that we also now have an academic group whose entire matrix is threatened by what? Very humble people. It's always been like this. And thank God now we're in a situation where you can self-publish, or you can go to smaller, publishers. You can put together something on DVD like we do, and you can do shows like you're doing, Adam. And this is very, very good because, as I'm saying, this natural energy of change that is taking place, I believe, is very, very significant. I've actually linked this new energy in my work even to what Christians would refer to as the Holy Spirit. And I do that to make it very clear that there's nothing small or petty or meaningless about the changes that are coming in our age. We are literally in the state of Armageddon. We are literally in a countdown to and we're actually in it, the age of awakening. The age of revealing is happening right now. I look at my own work as being a key example of this. I look at the emails that I'm getting as a key example of this. I look at the work that other people are putting together, as a key example of this. And I'm looking at the awakening, however slow or gradual that it is, as also signs of this. And long may it continue, these movies and even the smaller little productions that are coming out, and people's individual awakening. And I don't care if that awakening takes place through total frustration and disgruntlement from some people who just are so fed up with the garbage that they've been handed by their parents and by the world. Brilliant. If the goal of that is awakening, then so be it. Or if it's a natural, colder, more intellectual, curiosity towards a new kind of study, a new kind of interest, a new kind of subject matter that they come upon this stuff, then again, by all means, I really don't care what is the motive, as long as the goal is awakening. And we are seeing that. The evidence is there. And that is why on the other side, these sorcerers, you see, have to then turn up the faucet on their side also.
Right.
They're not going to sit by, you see, while this kind of psychological change takes place.
The pace of it all has just increased so much.
Yeah,
and,
you increase the frequency.
It's
but let's never
sense of panic, right? I mean,
that's right. And threat. Remember, haven't they held that whole pyramid together with a bunch of promissory notes? Haven't they given decorations and silly medals and stupid letters after the name to all these punks? Everyone wanting to have their face on Time magazine or whatever garbage, or a better seat on some other leviathan of evil. Oxford, Cambridge is full of it, full of the psychophantasm and full of that arrogance, that preposterous arrogance. The whole thing is rotten to the core. Knowledge plays no part. What knowledge? It's ego. It's vanity. And it's the idea that they own knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have this within the alternative community as well. That's what I've been talking about earlier. You have it wall to wall throughout the bloody world. I get emails from all sorts of arrogant, these people always trying to, point the finger or nitpick on some minor area of my work, you see. And I understand what's underneath it. Because I understand that greater than hatred, greater than any other emotion that exists in the world, envy is the key emotion. And maybe one day we can do a whole show just on that emotion. But in my world and in my vision of the world, envy is a very, 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 very key emotion to study, and it's different than jealousy.
From talks with John Lash about the archons, the main motivation of the archons, he said, that was written in the Gnostic literature, was envy.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yeah, he says the most clear definition of the motivation of the archons, he says, is envy, and that they don't act in sensible ways. People wonder, well, what's this? Are they trying to take over? What are they trying to do? He says that in the Gnostic writings, their motivation is envy, but they don't operate by any kind of goal at all. He says all they want to do is fuck with our minds.
Well, okay, then I would endorse that 100%. And since we're on the subject of envy, I will add one more anecdote to expand on it so people understand. They need to understand specifically what I meant when I said that envy is not jealousy. Jealousy is not a vice, really, ultimately. And the reason is this. If you see Jimmy Page playing a beautiful rosewood double neck Gibson SG, you might go, what a lucky bugger, look at that guitar, I'd like one. And I know because I've said it many times. I go, yeah, I love that guitar.
Look at that.
But that doesn't mean that you don't want him to have it.
Yeah.
All it means, jealousy is just, oh, look at my neighbor's lawn, look at that, or look at that Camaro, or that, Viper he just bought. Jesus, I'd love one of those. Look at that guitar, it's magic, I'd love one of those. That's jealousy, but you're not saying that but jealousy can also be a celebration of the fact that Jimmy Page owns that guitar and he plays it really well. Or that your neighbor has that amazing car and he bloody well deserves it for all the hard work he's put in. Envy, on the other hand, which is why it's so pernicious, and I'm not surprised that you tell me now that it's been in the Gnostic Gospels, envy is very deep. Envy is very deep, and I don't think people in the world are that savvy to it at all. I don't think their antenna is as up on envy as it is on other, pernicious vices like greed and hatred and all of that. I believe envy outranks them all, and the reason is this. When you're envious of somebody who has something you want, and it can be a mental trait or it can be physical objects, you want it, but you don't want the other person to have it. What really hurts you is that person has it, or that person's good at it, or that person, you see, was worthy of it, or that person received it, or whatever, or that this person has come up with it on their own. Envy is where and envy is so dark, Adam, that you would even destroy that Gibson SG, and you would even go about not having it yourself, and even destroying all the Gibson double neck SGs in the world, just so that he couldn't have it.
Right.
That's the difference. And people need to think about this, because there are people beside you, people walking around you, who really, really strongly have this kind of envy. And we have it, as you've just pointed out, in the scriptures, talking about the top forces there's this element within their brain. And so you see, and the place that you'll find it the most, even though a physical crime that you can take into court may not be attending the envy, doesn't make it any less of a crime. You're going to find it in the halls of the academica. And you see, one of the problems with this alternative movement, as we progress down the line, is that we may have this backlash in the so-called academic world, in which these academic types start to fear and start to really, get antsy about the fact that the Alex Joneses and David Icks and Michael Cremos, you see, and other people, other writers, who granted, their books are not done by major publishers in the world. Their books are more speculative. Their research may be less rigorous, as is demanded in academica. I'm accepting all of that. They may have more error, quote unquote, in some of their books, because they're not as rigorously, edited or researched, etc. Whatever. Well, that's only to be expected. But that is more than made up for by the scope and the brilliance of what these independent amateurs, you see, are discovering. The scope of it, which is not to be found in the academic world. So this is something that I'm foreseeing, you see, that the academic world is not just going to sit quiet. They didn't sit quiet when Augustus Laplangian was unraveling all the mysteries of the Maya back in the early 1900s. They didn't sit quiet when Wilhelm Reich was analyzing and completely discovering the roots of all human sickness, connecting to the biotic and the bioenergetics. Right. They didn't pay any attention when Alexander Lowen, his prodigy, went on to elaborate on the whole bioenergetic theory of mankind. You see, they haven't listened to the Manuel Velikovskys and the Cummins Beaumonts and the McDarries. None of these mavericks have ever been welcomed or ever been purveyed. In fact, it was before the advent of the internet, and even still, it's quite difficult to find these people's work. So, and there's many, many other examples that one can give of this kind of thing, where there's active suppression of the mavericks. Absolutely. And then there's this whole carnival, the circus of the academica, just mulling over the most meaningless garbage. They've never been able to get the bottom of anything that really matters. In fact, worse, now that we're into genes and we're into the science of the gene, you see, we have got some of the most pernicious people and the most pernicious mindsets operating again in one of the most vulnerable fields, in which again man is just a robot, man is just a cyborg, man is just a spiritual machine we can turn on and off under the pretext of making his life easier and his health better and all of this other malarkey. Look at the absolute horror of all of that, and the ideologies and philosophies that are now again being endorsed and purveyed, and millions of dollars. It would be okay if they just were sitting there and nobody funded them or took them seriously. We wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't matter what these maniacs thought. But the problem is, the whole royal societies of the world are endorsing these people, and the think tanks are endorsing them, and the millions of dollars that they're being given, billions of dollars, into these areas. That they, again, like I said, all academics believe that they are masters of the game, that knowledge is something they own. They're like territorial.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same as some wrestler who's territorializing the ring. These people do not want to have, they're so arrogant and they're envious. Not one of them understands that knowledge is the, as I'll say this so many times, knowledge is the forte of all. Knowledge is not owned by a society. It doesn't have a logo. It doesn't have a stamp on it. It doesn't have a royal seal or a watermark on it. It doesn't have a hallmark, Knowledge is for you. It's for everybody. It's for anyone in the streets. Anyone. You don't have to, we've been trained to think in certain ways about knowledge and about observation. But the world of knowledge can be completely changed by one individual, by one child, by one prodigy, by one seeker. It's a matrix that anyone can get into and investigate and come to any kind of understanding. And it doesn't have to be circumvented by rightness and wrongness and, awards and flowers and speeches and all of this kind of thing. Knowledge is there for every human mind to investigate and discover by simple acts of observation and study. And the hell with all of these, colleges and universities and think tanks who, the whole meritocratic system that's just rotten. Look at Russell, right? What about Tesla?
Exactly.
Right? What about Walter Russell and Nikola Tesla, you see? And so many other great geniuses. The list goes on within the field of mathematics, within the field of archaeology, within the field of history. Edward Gibbon. Edward Gibbon is one of the greatest historians. He never received no damn knighthood or some letters after his name and all of this nonsense, you see? So we have mavericks in every field. And again, it goes to the heart of what I'm saying. And I hope that in the future it's going to be more so, that people get the guts to take on and handle some very large, difficult academic type subjects. And they feel that, hey, I don't need all of that rubbish. I can go to libraries, I can look on the internet, I can find things out for myself. I don't need to have a big agenda for doing that or anything like that. I want to find out. I have a love of knowledge, a love of wisdom. In all my work I am always pointing this out, that philosophy meant love of wisdom, not gaining of wisdom, gaining of knowledge. And gaining knowledge any idiot can do. But falling in love with knowledge, falling in love with wisdom and the process that it takes, this is what is lacking in our world today, you see. We don't have the passion. We have the vanity, we have the envy, we have the jealousy, we have all of these other things. But we don't have the love anymore for wisdom, for knowledge. That exists in very few people. And that's why those people who have now fallen out of love, what is the consequence of that? Well, it's orcdom. We're the orcs.
Yeah.
We're the people who don't sit there passively and just allow Big Brother, the media, to tell us what we're meant to believe, show us where to go, because we have no passion, no spirit, no energy left. We've basically debauched ourselves. Our minds have been completely raped, you see, and debauched. And parents are complicit in this, just as are the priests and the politicians as well. So there has to be a restoration. And the restoration is the Holy Spirit, the descent of the true Holy Spirit. It is the movement of the planet Pluto, or at least what Pluto represents, you see. It's this new understanding, and it is the Mother Nature rushing in to save her gormless kids from suicide by, eating stuff that's just so wrong for them. And we are a people who are just gobbling down the sugar, because it's sweet. It can end up, destroying us, poisoning ourselves. This is the narcissistic, society that we find ourselves in today. But again, the ultimate solution is an individual one. It can only be an individual one, because if it isn't an individual motivation, then it's pure tyranny. Because not me and no one else in this world should tell another person what to do, think, or say. As soon as you have that, you have another form of tyranny, however mild. All change must not be compelled. If it's compelled, then I'm sorry, but you've just reinvented the tyrant again. Maybe not as on a biggest level, but it's the same old thing. It's the same old thing that happens in the schoolroom. It's the same old tyranny of thou shalt not. Do as I say, not as I do, which happens in every household with the parents. You see, so in this alternative community, in the seeking for truth, there can be no authority. There can be no path, fixed path. There can be no, compulsion at all. It has to be simply the most organic, most natural, most unaffected, and most unadulterated thing in your life. And therefore, it cannot be motivated out of any ego or vanity or material need or anything like that. It has to be motivated from a totally different center, a completely instinctual thing that the mind knows that it exists for one thing, and that is to think. That has been given thinking, which other creatures, even though they have their own form of intelligence, are not able to think. So why were we given thought? Well, why were we given the human reason? Exactly. Not because we can become expert mechanics or expert architects or city builders or world controllers. No, we were given the ability to think because we have to think about ourself. Selfhood is only a thinking human being, you see. So like you said earlier on about these people who this whole campaign against selfishness, quote unquote, is becoming rampant in our world. It's obvious because, of course, they're moving us more and more towards the collective. So, of course, the opposite of that is selfhood. So now there always has been, especially in theology, a great hatred of the self.
Yeah.
And the man of the selfhood, you see, like in the Ayn Rand sense. So, of course, we have everything and everyone telling us not to be selfish and never think of yourself. And it's a very strong meme that's all through religion, and it's often through a lot of Eastern mysticism as well. And it's certainly in the Christian tradition very, very strong. If you're just a nothing, serve your masters and all the rest of it. So I'm a very strong believer in Ayn Rand and the whole concept of selfhood, and a lot of other writers, that I can mention.
I got that feeling from reading Krishnamurti's work, big time, in his Awakening of Intelligence.
Well, Krishnamurti always spoke about the difference between inventiveness and creativity.
Right.
And he always linked creativity to the whole self or the whole mind or the whole consciousness, whereas invention is something of the brain. Like I go to school when I'm young, they program me how to add up and do sums and become very mathematical, and then out of all of that gained knowledge of this life, I go and invent something for the world system, and they just love me because of it. Right? That's academic, and they reward me. Creativity is often done for the self because it's a natural flowering of your selfhood. It's not even done with a motive. It's something that just it's like the aroma of a rose is the aroma of a rose. The rose isn't doing anything. When a cloud passes the sky, you can't say that cloud is doing it actively in the same way that men do things. Like in grammar you've got the verb. Nature doesn't operate with a verb. The clouds aren't winding themselves up in the morning to pass the sky for your delight, but there they are. They do exist. The mountain didn't invent itself just going, I've just got to be here. I've just got to look like this. I've just got to be a mountain. Because all sorts of things will happen if I am. The oak tree is not thinking about oakness or about being an oak, and it's different from a maple. It doesn't have any ego or vanity, but there it is, plugged into nature. Man is the only verb. Man is the only one who does things when he has to have a reason. He's the only being with this kind of, vain motivation. Now, Krishnamurti, you see, is actually really ambivalent on the matter of selfhood, actually. And I believe this was because he was had both an Eastern backing, Eastern heritage, and a Western heritage. If you read a lot of the philosophers who have this Anglo-Indian, or Anglo-Eastern background, and I know this well because I have it myself, you'll often notice this ambivalence. So there's a whole debate about what actually Krishnamurti did mean. I believe, I agree with you that he was a person who really did believe in the self. But many times in his speaking, he would negate selfishness. But I think it's just semantics. I believe that the whole question is surrounding upon how an Eastern person sees the self, and how badly that word is often used. It's so taken out of context. Remember earlier we were talking about words that are taken out of context, like independence and individuality and freedom and community and so on. Well, one of the most egregious words, one of the most egregious examples of a word taken out of perpetual context, and I mean by very highbrow people, and it confuses the hell out of audiences, and sometimes in a very lethal way, is the word selfish or selfhood. And in Krishnamurti, sadly, you also find this. Now, I don't want to get into this whole debate here because it'll go on for hours, but again, people have to be very, very clear. And I believe that when you're addressing these psychological issues like ego, selfhood, society, extroversion, introversion, etc., when you're investigating the meaning of these words, you have to very much distinguish between the way an Eastern person would see it and the way a Western person with psychological background would see it. Because the way that Freud and Jung, the people who basically come up with these terms, meant them is very, very, very different than any Eastern person would ever understand it. For instance, in India, when the word I is said, you see, it's very rarely said. People have a very different sense of independence. Even the upbringing. And of course we now see this in Muslim families. The Eastern idea of the community is so important, it's difficult to say whether their true sense of I-ness even exists in Eastern people, unless they've been very, very westernized. So there's a whole question there about what people even know, even when you're addressing the question of the self or the I. What are people hearing you? What are they hearing? Do they really even have an understanding? Do they even have an understanding that the mind and the brain, for instance, are not the same thing? Do they even have an understanding that the self and the ego are not the same thing? So what is the anatomy of the psyche? I mean, people know the anatomy of the body. They'd laugh at you if you said, where's the heart? Where's the liver? Where's the kidney? You know what I mean? Where's the pancreas? People would just laugh. They think you're funny if you ask them, hey, do you know where your lungs are? It'd be like comical. But do you know how ignorant people are when they have to talk about the anatomy of the psyche, the anatomy of consciousness itself? There's unbelievable ignorance, and this is, again, one of the things that I'm particularly focused on in my work, because it goes to the heart of the whole psychological solutions. How can you have any psychological solutions when nobody even knows the anatomy of the psyche? I mean, for goodness sake.
Well, I found it really helpful in talking of the authentic self, I found that by just calling it the authentic self, I was able to say, yes, I can see this very clearly, that there is the levels of self that are really just pieces of the, or parts of the ego, the clothing of the ego. But the authentic self, when everything else is stripped away, you know, when you've peeled away all the layers and the only thing left is that you can't peel away, then you have now, you know, reached your authentic self.
And you see, this, you hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly right. It is by negation. When the other is not, when the false is not, then the true is. But the true cannot be apprehended actively in the way that the ego tries. As I said, you know, it's very much a verb. Everything is aggressive, everything's acquisitive, everything's attainment. Everything, especially psychologically. We're not only materialists in a worldly sense. We're materialists in a psychic sense, most people. They want God and angels and heaven in exactly the same way they want the cute wife, the swimming pool, and the Mercedes, and you know, a bank full of money. So the materialism is taken into the inner world as well. People are so I-oriented, but again, like I was saying about Krishnamurti, what do you mean when you say the I? When a person like Krishnamurti is talking about selfishness, I don't believe he's talking about selfishness in the way that we'd hear that word. What he's really talking about is the narcissistic creature.
Exactly.
Right? Which is a very different creature than an egocentric person that, say, Ayn Rand was talking about. So the narcissistic creature, oh yes, we definitely have that. We definitely have that. But that's a broken person. That's a person who inwardly hates themselves, who's in deep inner lack, trauma, and is basically, you know, in a very cut up state inside, and whose inner nature is of great self-loathing and self-hatred, and therefore, of course, their relationships to other people is essentially the same. It's necrotic, and it's sadomasochistic, although most people around a narcissistic person may not see that for a while. It takes about half a year or 9 months or so until, you know, a very consummate narcissist's behavior, you know, a trained person like me can see it very quickly, but if you're not aware of these people, it would take about 9 months before their behavior started to look, you know, pathological to you, because before their masks started to come down. But let's leave that aside for now. The ultimate idea is that the narcissistic person is on paper as a very self-loving person, especially when you don't know that the narcissist is a narcissist. They often come over very charming, you see, as we know, and also that they appear to be very centered and very graceful even, and very on the ball, and very extrovert, and very optimistic, and very, very, you know, especially self-conscious in their mannerisms and in their cosmetics and all the rest of it, the famous narcissistic traits. But you see, that's overlaid upon the very opposite. So when you're talking about the authentic self is not any part of the ego that just is modified or better than the darker parts of the ego. Because what we have since the great age of catastrophe and since the trauma is the ego. And the ego is this sort of simulacra. It's like a sampled self. It's a hardened area, just like a spastic muscle, that we have forgotten or we have taken for the center of the self. This can happen. It's just like, for instance, you know, you could take a mirage for a real city. You know, like they say, you know, a person who's never seen a mansion might take a hut in a Calcutta, you know, as a great mansion if they haven't seen the real thing. So, unfortunately, that's where we're in. We're all paupers hiding in a slum when the great city of the self, you know, has been completely abandoned and forgotten. And the ego has a million ways of keeping us in that trap. Now, the other thing is that you said is that when you peel away all the surface stuff that, you know, you find is recalcitrant and that you can do without and that seems to be morally or spiritually suspect, you peel all of this stuff away. The downside of that, though, is that you have to wonder who's doing the peeling away, because the ego is a marvelous serpentine creature that knows how to work on itself to improve itself. So what we have down through time is not a real move towards the authentic self, but we have the ego upgrading its own state. So it starts off as a janitor, but it ends up a general, right? Or first of all, you were on the first floor, and now you're in the penthouse and the view looks marvelous. Trouble is, you're in the same boxed-in building. You know, you've never left and you've never actually gone out into the streets to really breathe the free air. So this is the problem of the ego, and that the ego has marvelous ways of fixing what is wrong. We call that yoga, or we call that the New Age movement, or religion, or any of this other nonsense, which is again decoration for upgrading the nature of the ego, which is why so many false people are into this. I mean, you only need to go to LA to take a perfect look at all the types I'm talking about here, right? Oh, but they're all into it. There's not a creature on the face of this earth, even today in corporate world, who's not a Buddhist. I'll say no more. Don't even get me started. But there's a reason for this, right? This trendification of what's going on. Just don't even get me started. But the point is that the reason why this is not because of a true inward, real desire to as we said in psychological terms, locate the inner self or whatever. It's just renovation for the ego. It's just to find a few moments of peace in a completely toxic, hyper extroverted, utterly preposterous lifestyle. You do need a break from it, like you take a vacation physically. Well, these yogas and a lot of this pseudo-Buddhism and whatnot, it's just a simple vacation these people take from a preposterous, evil-drenched world, a life which is completely, toxic and carnivorous. But now they have to have the veneer that they're not the aggressive, acquisitive, and ultimately toxic individuals. What is the perfect veneer? Well, the New Age movement has handed to the people on a plate this perfect mask that these people can play now, as so many people in America are playing. And again, the return of many people in America to evangelist, paradigms, and even this has always been going on in the other parts of the world. Or this whole hippy-dippy trek, to seek out some sort of path or some sort of guru to tell you how to do it, I mean, this is the antithesis of selfhood. The guidelines, that's all. You have the right to be a signpost for somebody else, but you have no right to walk the path for that person, nor even accompany them on that road. The only message that a teacher can teach somebody is that, here's some guidelines, here's where I've gone on my, sort of adventure, but I insist that you must be completely independent. I insist that you must have no gurus, you must cling to nothing, you must attach to no one or to nothing, and you must ultimately, like a man walking in the world without any direction, try to find, your own direction, your own rhythm, your own flavor, your own scent. But this is what individuals do not do. What they do is they jump back onto the same conveyor belt that has, just like the conveyor belts and the franchises that have been created for the world in a material sense, when people are seeking the truth or what they call the light, they invariably do this, and this is one of the greatest problems because it arrests human beings. Just like I've said in my work on Atlantis, that one of the reasons why we're in the mess we are today is because our technological and scientific evolution has far exceeded our moral and psychological. It's not that there's anything wrong with, evolution. It's just that these things have moved too far ahead, and our psychological, moral principles, are very recalcitrant. And in that sense, we're very primitive people. It's part of the reason why the world is so full of these goblins and specters and evil arcs, is because, you see, we've let our emotional, moral sensibilities, our discrimination, our sort of sense, our antenna for evil, it's really faded. Unfortunately, this is where we find ourselves today. And the other reason is, again, we've also been shunted away from true selfhood. And we have an ego that is really, really brilliant at being able to revamp itself. And every so often, every phase in history, there is a revamping of the ego. And the ego can harden and tighten and decorate itself again, so that most people are satisfied by living in the sphere of the ego. It can enhance itself. And people can mistake that for God. I mean, after all, the gods of the world are nothing but the projection of the human ego, after all. So the ego has some tremendous, abilities that we all need to study and know about, so that we're very aware of the deceptive nature of the ego. What I'm saying is just an elaboration on what you were saying, so that when you're picking away at all the things that are not true, this is what it entails, you see. You have to be able to get into dialogue with the ego and really discover its incredible nature in order to maybe apprehend the other thing.
This ego, is that the strings of the puppet, and they've learned now they don't control us. All they need to do is control our egos, let the ego do the rest.
Yeah, remember the link between the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid, between the puppet masters and the mannequin? How we're all complicit in it? That's it. We all have the alien gene, we all have the traumata, we all have the ego. And it is because of this ego, which is a false center. It's good in a way to call it a narcissistic center as opposed to an authentic center. The word narcissism is actually a very, very good word. It should be used a lot to identify these particular parts of the ego. And the authentic self is something different. That's a completely different center, which is a reflection of the whole mind, the whole of consciousness, not just the ego. The ego is just part of consciousness. Consciousness itself is very different. Consciousness ultimately includes what we would refer to as the unconscious, if you want to get into the highways and byways of psychology. So you're talking about a great, very, very large matrix of consciousness, of which the ego is just like a small lighthouse in the middle of a gigantic ocean of consciousness. And we don't explore that ocean of consciousness anymore at all, except maybe a few geniuses, a few Salvador Dali types, who've made little treks out into the wilderness. Most human beings are never going to do that in the whole time of their life. They're going to remain entirely in the lighthouse. Worse than that, they're probably going to spend their whole life in the room at the top where the brightest light is. And stick there to where the hottest light is and where the most directional light is, and never ever go outside that place. But the thing is that, yes, the people who are at the top of the pyramid are supreme narcissists. There are people that make the ordinary, everyday little egomaniac narcissist, kind of person, typical Bill O'Reilly type, they make that person look, like ridiculous. They're so far more developed than that. If you can call it development, although it's ultimately a necrotic. Excuse me. It's ultimately a necrotic. What is truly called necrophiliac. I know people have heard the term necrophilia in other contexts, and they may not realize that the term is actually a psychological term, and it defines a kind of mind. It defines a kind of ego setting. Okay, so the true and pure meaning of the word necrophiliac, lover of death, necrotic, toxic, unsane, perhaps would be a good term. I try to avoid, spiritual terms like evil, like
right.
Contaminated terms that come out of the religious world, etc. Although, again, you can use those words. The reason why I don't use those words is because if you use those words, it's sort of, they're used by Christians, and the problem is that the Christians are probably the worst group to be pointing at anyone else's evil.
So much stigma attached to some of those words, I can understand that you speak clinically. I think that. Well,
the problem is, you see, the Luciferians to whom we're referring created Christianity.
Yeah.
So as a member of Christianity, it's like pointing one finger, but you get three fingers pointing back. I do actually see, the true remedy as to uncovering these people is not going to happen from any orthodox religious point of view, even though there's been some excellent work done by religious people. Ultimately, you see, if you are identified with anything that these Luciferians have created, you're on a sinking ship.
Exactly.
It's paradoxical to point on for a ship that's already sinking, or let's say has already been created by the hidden masters that you think are your enemy. It sets up an incredible paradox. I don't know how people have not been able to spot this before. The only thing is that you have to, be very objective and be non-partisan in order to be able to perceive who's really at the top of the pyramid. It just goes without saying almost. But getting back to the main point, you see, is that yes, when you're trying to identify these super narcissists, these pathological people, we can only diagnose them correctly and sanely if we understand the anatomy of the psyche, we understand these dynamics. And that's what my work goes into. That's what, the DVD we're doing right now and the one to come is going to be very much focused on, so that we can start making sense of why science and why other, academics do what they do, even how the royal families do what they do, all of these kinds of things. To start, we've never really anatomized these people. That's why I'm optimistic about the world we're living in, Adam, is because we now have the intelligence, the education, and the psychological ability to do something that our forefathers were never able to do. We've not only been able to isolate that pernicious evil force that's out there, but we can diagnose it, so that it's no longer just finger pointing and exonerating our own self, our own tyrannical aspects. We mustn't be able to do that. We must be able to understand what it is that motivates these people to do what they do, because after all, there must be something terribly contaminated. It's a phenomenon. It's something that can be studied. Evil can always be studied, just like anything, like any type of behavioral, behavior can be studied. So we now have to study evil,
and to be able to step out of the stream, be able to,
yes,
and as you said, get off the ship, or just at least get out of the way.
We have to, because hasn't the religious people of the world always been telling you that they've been studying evil? And it's a total lie. They haven't. In fact, it's from their world that the greatest evil emanates. I hope by now that is clear to people. It better be bloody clear, because it's a fact. And therefore, it's from from all these established leviathans that are absolutely tyrannical, in the sense that they, like I said, the academics thinking that they own knowledge, and knowledge is something they possess. and something they can lock up over there in the Bodleian Library or whatever, or these corporations or the governments who think they own and control power and treat people like slaves. You see, we're talking about tyranny here. And there's an anatomy of tyranny. And the anatomy of tyranny, just like the Socrates and the Platos of the world always understood, and like the Machiavellis of the world understand, is that it's rooted in psychology. And you see, these people are very psychologically aware. Let's just put it this way, that they're more psychologically aware than we, their slaves, are. So that's where we need to turn the tables. I mean, the blurb of my previous book, The Irish Origins, talks about that, about shining light back onto the faces of those who claim to love the light. Okay, let's do that. Let's start educating ourselves psychologically so that we can start to understand the nature of the spider, the nature of the multi-legged, multi-headed thing that may have no spirit at all. That may be just a form of parasite, slightly different than the parasites we've known, but a vampiristic type of energy that we are helping to feed, that we are actually feeding every day with our energies, with our emotions, particularly our emotions, by our fears, see, all of these kinds of things. So I don't foresee any difficulty in getting rid of the parasite. I mean, I went into this in the last chapter of the Atlantis book where I talked about our reconnection to nature. And I also talked about the fact, drawing on martial arts and Zen philosophy, Druidic philosophy, if you will, shamanic philosophy, if you will, that when you are so systemically strong that your enemy cannot defeat you, you've won. But fighting your enemy with any kind of weaponry or tool or agenda that is also being used by the enemy, or that it might have even be handed to you by your enemy, will never succeed. So that's what we've been doing. We've been fighting with the tools provided by our enemy. This is why there's never been a modicum of real, actual, you see, combat or change. And in fact, what's actually happened is most of the world is now exhausted or dead. And so the big brother is actually, in a way, as secretive and as small as they are, as ultimately powerless as they are, they're actually quite content. I mean, I think they've been clinking their glasses many times over some of their great successes. And I do believe that they feel that man is about as dumbed down as he can get. When they look at the world right now, I mean, when you look at the world right now, if you were one of them, wouldn't you be satisfied?
Well, I think they really show themselves in this way, in that now they don't even bother to hide their actions.
Right.
That's right. And in a sense, I think it plays right into their game, is that they want you to know, look, yeah, we did that, we got you by the,
that's right.
Under our
That's
thumbs, and that's, we want you to know it, And
I don't think all of them are like that, but certainly a lot who are maybe on a lower rung, or the media types, the people, they absolutely don't mind at all. There's even politicians who've been sort of, made Freudian slips and stuff like that. So it's definitely provable that, they actually relish this. And that's why I'm a bit, skeptical of people who are talking about, oh my God, they're going to wipe out the populations, they're going to open all these prisons, they've got all of these gated, prisons for us, and they're going to do this to us and that. As far as I'm concerned, I would go, why would you want to do that? The smiling depressive, the unjailed prisoner, is already such a despicable creature walking around on this earth. How, if you were in control of this world, would you have any worry whatsoever? People are about as drugged up and as dumbed down as you can possibly get, and things are getting even worse. You only have to look at the teenage population. The teenage population doesn't even know what was happening, with the First and Second World War or anything. I mean, the list is endless of what they don't know. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. Man and the next generation to come is even going to be worse. So I couldn't even foresee how they could be in any kind of panic or any kind of, any type of trepidation. They may have certain concerns, of course. Like I said, there is a rising tide of knowledge, and they're always going to be keeping an eye on that, etc. But I don't think they're always going to look at the bigger picture, and they're going to look at the people of the world. Look at the East. Look at India and how narcissistic the Indians have become. This was always meant to be the holy cradle of whatever. Of course, if you're from there, you have people like in your family from there, and you've really made a study, there's nothing holy about India whatsoever, quite the reverse. But on paper, the place looks like the greatest, most spiritual, holy shrine, all these gurus and whatnot. Look at the place now. A little bit of capital has come in, a little bit of outsourcing has come in, and they are more materialistic. It's the same thing goes for the Japanese and the Chinese. The unbelievable racism and narcissism and materialism is coming to the East Like an obsession that the Western man could never even imagine in his wildest dreams, all right? So many illusions are being shattered. So when you are part of the control mechanism and you're looking down from your penthouse at all of this, and how successful McDonald's is in every, third world place in the world, and how everybody's smoking McDonald's and wearing their 49ers hats or whatever they're into, and they're into all the worst kind of music you can imagine, and you look at all of that stuff, how could you not be totally content? People are as regimented and as dumbed down as possible. This always needs to be taken into consideration by those who are looking into this matter. But again, getting back to the main point, the solutions, is if we now realize that these people have had their fingers on the pulse of the psyche of mankind, so that their particular, traumas and their wars and their draconian measures, or even the times when they lighten up a bit and you can have a hippie era and all these other kinds of things, they keep their fingers on the pulse of what we would call the greater body of society. This is what is hard to see, because it's the habitat. They're controlling the habitat. And the animal, remember, within the habitat, like the ant within the territory, or the seal or the dolphin, does not feel that action. That's why as we go down through the years, I'm hoping that people will start to see this more subtle manipulation of the human habitat. Some people are waking up to this, and it's great. But when they're manipulating the habitat, and they're doing it through, and also manipulating the individual mind through psychology, the only remedy is to turn the tables on them. Use the same kind of concept that they've been using of the human race. Those aren't tools created by them. That knowledge is man's knowledge. Psychology is your raison d'etre for being in this world. So pick up those tools and start using it to understand the nature of the self, the human dynamic. Learn how this war on consciousness takes place. Learn how the psyche, as well as the biology, is manipulatable, and how we buy into what these people are providing for us. Nobody is standing at your door in fatigues with a gun to your head telling you to do anything. Not in your house, not in your job, and it never will be. They create the control purely through psychological, psychic means. Yes, there is a physical, social, political concomitant to that, or an aspect of that, or a permutation to that kind of control. But again, mostly, it's you buying into it. You're the one going to take their vaccinations. You're the one going to the doctor to suck in the medicine, the garbage that he's giving you, the poison. You're the one, who's going to these leviathans. You're the one who goes and into the legal system without understanding about the law. You're the one who goes to their courts. You're the one who pays the taxes. You see, you're the one who sends your kids to these monstrous schools.
I was thinking
as if they're going to learn anything.
I mean, you just said that no one's putting a gun to your head, but they were doing that exactly in Maryland recently, forcing parents to take their kids to get vaccinated.
Yes, but there are 100. But remember, those people were not making. They were not. See, this is again where even a basic understanding of the law of the state matters. This is what I'm saying. People are legally. I mean, remember I've said that over the political system, I always favor the legal system. At least you should know your legal rights.
Yeah.
All those families had to do was create a class action, not only against those officers individually, take them to civil court for breach of their work, individually. Not the police force, but those men can all be taken to civil court for false arrest or belligerent activities and be fined, and they will be fined in civil court. It can be provable. The second thing to have done, of course, is that no criminal action ever took place by those families not taking their children to be vaccinated or not taking them to school or whatever. No crime. No corpus delicti, right? No crime was being perpetrated. And secondly, and further up the ladder, when you really get into this kind of sovereignty law, this kind of corporate law, whatever, you'll find that a state is a hypothetical creature. Not the mayor, not the police chief, not any of these governors have any legal right whatsoever that's endorsed by the people. Nobody ever came to you and said there's a thing called a state. A stateism is no law whatsoever creates a state.
But if they're not following, if the state itself is not following the law to begin with,
right?
What kind of
exactly? Yeah, you can take by Freedom of Information Acts and all sorts of other things that people are not that difficult for intelligent people to work out how to do. Through RICO forms and other things, you can take the mayor, the judge, the police chief, the captain of the chief, the guy who set that order up for those cops to go down into the street and do that. You could take the individual cops. Each one of them can end up in court. See how they like it when, again, as you say, you shine the light back on them. We are in a state of perpetual ignorance and a perpetual fear that traumatizes action. But Eustace Mullins, you see, and Jordan Maxwell, and so many other people who are experts in this law, and I don't mean you have to take it as far as they need to do, just learn some basic in-your-face stuff that happens when investigative journalists and class action lawsuits are taking place. Just know the basics of your rights, and then these things, like vaccinations and so on and so forth, That a reverend is protected against taking vaccinations because he can come under religious exoneration. Knights Templars, Masons, right? Priests.
Huh.
Find out about the difference between canon law and civil law and maritime law. Study these fascinating things, you see, so people can start discovering their rights and realize that a lot of people will never be able to study this, or they have a tremendous resistance. So then, my voice goes out to the intelligent people of the world who don't find a problem learning these things. Then create blogs and websites and newsletters and even little YouTube programs to educate your fellows, your brothers and sisters, in the legal strengths that you have, because that's very, very important. That it's an alternative to the political Leviathan, because politicians promise and never deliver. And if you take political action thinking that you're going to move society forward, or you're going to better your state, or it's like the 3 strikes law. Yeah, that was created out of a man who thought he was doing something positive. And look at the horrible evil that man has done that can never now be, ever rescinded again.
Yeah.
It was during the Polly Klaas case. Well, yes, his daughter got murdered and he pushed for the 3 strikes thing to come through. And now, so many innocent people have been jailed because of the 3 strikes law who've done nothing. So this is what I mean. You knee-jerk, you move out of emotion, and terrible, terrible things are done. And that's how we play into the hands of the very deceivers who really don't have to do anything, Adam. They don't even have to pull the strings anymore. We, the white mice running on their wheel, create more havoc from our own ignorance than they could ever manufacture by overt control. So this needs to be addressed. Yes, there is overt control historically from the people at the top of the pyramid and further down, but there is also the mess.
Yeah.
That the well-meaning...
The prisoners are the guards now.
Yes, exactly. And this is the thing that also needs to be addressed. And the answer is, again, the same, whether it's the top of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid. Knowledge, know thyself, psychology, sociology, learn what's been going on, like an anatomy. Do it objectively. Don't get into paranoia. I don't want to hear fear. I don't want to hear woe is me. We don't know woe is me. Anything can be happening tomorrow. It could be doom, it could be gloom, it could be great. We don't know. It's not our business to think about what's going to happen tomorrow. We only have the business to look at the problem right now, just in exactly the same way as the nurses and the doctors and casualty ward look at the wound that is happening now. They deal with the fact right now, just like a man whose crops are dying, he has to deal with the problem right now. Yeah. We need to get into that mode, you see, and have an urgency and have a passion. But don't have a paranoia and don't have any of these fatiguing, self-defeating, self-negating emotions, you see. And don't hang around with people who have that kind of pessimism. It's not good for you.
It just freezes you. Yeah. It just closes you down.
And also, simply like we started talking about at the beginning of the show, don't worry if anybody else is doing it. Don't be waiting, looking at your watch, waiting for the we, the us, and the our. Get on with it yourself. Delight in being the first to do something. It doesn't matter if your mom and your dad and your silly girlfriend is into it. Go on and do it yourself. And if they want to follow, fine. They may not even know that you're doing it. Do it in your garage. Do it in your garret. Make it a personal study. Get real. And don't bother talking to those people who are not into this, who can't grasp this. The day will come when they will get it. Or out of natural curiosity, they might approach you. But see, and I'm saying this, and why I'm so insistent on this, is because I keep getting emails from people all the time who've exhausted themselves, Adam, trying to convert, the people that they live with and the people that, they go out with and the mates down at the pub. And they come back absolutely exhausted and tyrannized and utterly exasperated. Why? Who asked you to do that?
Right.
In fact, here's a perfect example for the listeners. Last month we went and did the Liverpool conference. When we studied the demographics and by the way, this was a sold-out gig, by the way.
Yeah.
Tickets were oversold, okay?
I was checking that out. That was great.
Yeah, and it was great. Now, however, when we looked at the demographics, we found that almost nobody from the town of Liverpool, this was hosted right in the centre of Liverpool, right near Sefton Park, almost nobody from Liverpool turned up.
Oh. Yeah, everybody came from far away.
All over England, Scotland, Wales, Suffolk, Bath, as I said, Scotland, Scandinavia, lots of people from there, people from France, and people from Ireland even, right? All around, in other words. Nobody from Liverpool. That's what I mean. If you think that this message is only for local yokels, forget it. All evidence proves the contrary, even evidence on the internet, etc. It's not going to be something that you're going to see happening in your local area. because this is a very big message. That's why. You can't have somebody swallow the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's not going to happen in your local area amongst 2 or 3 of you. You'll be lucky to have even a single person interested. But this is a global message, and the reason why is because it's a very big subject. You have a tremendous interest in it, but it's going to be spread over a large period of, a large space. So never feel pessimistic, because there are millions who are into this. Millions in the third world and millions elsewhere. But the downside is you may not absolutely see that in your home territory, and that's just simple sociological demographics. It's just simple to understand why that is. But it should not make people pessimistic at all, because I'm seeing that pessimism, that when they find that there's not all ears and there's a giant audience in their area, or they can't get something going, but they look around and find everybody turns out for a goddamn football match or some other nonsense, well, that's just to be accepted. Don't fret about it. Don't get pessimistic about it. It's just the way it is. The audience is a global one. And I very early on, learned that, and then took my message up to the global level through the web and through, public talks around the world, same like David Icke did. I didn't sit home trying to convince the dumbasses in my street, to make it blunt. You know what I mean? No way.
Well, it's just such an amazing tool. When I started my podcast, the first thing that really stunned me was you can look on the global map, you can see the world map, and you see where the downloads are coming, and you're like, wow, I mean, when was the last time you could just do something in your in the loft of your barn, like what I'm doing, and have someone download it in the middle of Russia, and even like towards the Yukon? You start to feel that, well, there is a huge thrust, but if you only looked in your area, you'd think that it's all coming to an end, that it's just too late.
You'd think it was a desert. Yes, and this is, to say, the downside. The upside of it is that this is the spirit of the rebellion, the spirit of change I've been talking about, where you have the internet. You had to have that technology come about, because remember, the conspiracy movement as we know it probably couldn't even exist at all
without it.
Without the tools that came. You see, so here, when people broaden their perspective and look at the canvas from afar, they'll get what we were talking about earlier, that the right tools, the right place, the right intention, many things have to come together to create great change. We're almost there. We're almost there. It's a very small percentage now of what is required to really, starve this parasite. The tools are being handed to us by forces that are even outside of our own, understanding in a way.
I found your work when I was researching I was researching mythology into dragons, because I was putting dragons into this book I was illustrating, a children's book. And then all this stuff about bloodlines and all these things about the dragon lines and how dragons have been used in our mythology. And then I started to realize, all these archetypes actually show up in my own artwork. Like a lot of people out there now analyzing movies, analyzing art, and they go, look at this symbolism here, look at this symbolism there. And they assume that the artist knows what he's drawing, and it doesn't.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Well, exactly. And that's how people should have it evolve. They should be okay with that, where they're doing one thing and they have no idea where it leads. The second thing, I'm glad you brought up that whole question about, the subliminal context, the subliminal art. Because it was something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about how these academics, remember I said if we held our breath waiting for them to tell us about anything in archaeology or ethnology or, we'd have a hell of a long wait. Look what we have done in the alternative world. Well, I meant to also add this whole study of symbolism, both in films and just in marketing in general, in the whole corporate world, the stuff I've covered in my subversive work, but also long before me, Vance Packard and of course the very famous Brian Wilson Keyes, who wrote the book Subliminal Seduction.
Okay.
He's another one of these people that if you check out the amount, and he's still going, remember, he wrote a book in the 90s called Age of Manipulation, in which his introduction, he says the same thing. The scandal, the job loss, the vitriolization of that man, because he simply wrote a book that there are subliminal messages in advertising. Anyone who should doubt my words about this perniciousness of this academia, you see, and the way that they overtly suppress, and the amount of cantankerous, the sense of arrogance that they have towards knowledge. Here's a man who had a degree, and he worked within a university or a prestigious college, Brian Wilson Key, he wrote the book again, Subliminal Seduction. He was the first man in history, the number one, it happened in the 60s, to write that famous book that actually was almost like a bestseller at one point, Subliminal Seduction. Everyone in the world that read his book loved it, right? It was a great popular success, as many of those books have been. Who was his greatest enemy? Academia. Enough said, there we go.
Yeah.
But yes, exactly, what you're saying is very true, and I'm the same, man. It was through studying art, I mean just regular art, normal, medieval art, whatever you want to call it, that sort of slowly led into, these other areas. And I would say that I'm not ever also thinking about the masses. I mean, one of the most popular emails I get is, "Hey man, how come we can't find your book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble? Or, we can't even find it. We can't even find it on those online sites, and we've never been able to find it in our local bookstores." I said, "Look, well, I'll give you the same answer I give the other 10,000 people, and as I'm not interested in that. I don't like middlemen anyway, from a business point of view. And secondly, I have no interest in that. If you can type in Amazon.com, you can always, type in michaeltsarion.com. Is there any more difficulty in that, or something, And I also do it as a model, you see, so that other people will also take that more amateuristic, sort of, they'll feel like I'm a model, and say, look, this guy isn't running out there trying to, and it's not that I don't have some online distributors, I do, but the thing is, I don't, I'm not interested in being the, the next bestseller. This is never would anyone be into my work. I'm into it for those people who already know a lot of stuff about this kind of thing, who've already, like for instance with the Atlantis book, really contemplated the concept of Atlantis, and who've maybe wanted to know more, like I did. Or with the Irish Origins book, I'm interested in relating to people who've got real serious questions about the movement of the races, and about the lost continents, you see, and even, this whole concept of the connections between lands, when they say there has been no connections between those lands. I know there's a lot of people out there, think about that, and they're very interested in that. I know there's people who looked at sort of linguistic keys, where there's these connections between languages that have, thousands and thousands of miles apart. Or the question of the Scythians, or that great question about the Hyksos people of Egypt. Who were they really? That so many scholars have asked the question and nobody really answered it properly yet, until recently, and so on. Or the question about Moses and Akhenaten. These are all very variant subject matter. We're talking about, the lie of Palestine. And the fact that, these people who are the Jewish scholars keep telling you there was a Jerusalem and there was a Nazareth and there was a Holy Land, and yet there's not a shred of evidence to prove any of this stuff, that any of the biblical happenings that are in the Bible ever even happened in that hemisphere. Monumental lies that people accept, walking around here like thinking that Jesus was a man who, was crucified and all this nonsense. Or that there was a Herod and there was all, where's the proof? Go and point to it and you can't see it, yet they accept it. These are mirages, these are phantasmagorias that people are happy to believe. But come along a Commons Beaumont who can tell you the facts of the matter, and like we said earlier, they want to turn off and tune out. They don't want to listen to the person. They'd rather suppress him and even, have him completely annihilated, rather than accept a phase shift. So what is happening in our world today as we count down to 2012 is that at least is reversible. We are now in a time, we've been in it for the last 10 or so years, in which people's brains at least are a little bit more malleable to, in fact, endure a large U-turn or a phase shift, you see, or a paradigm shift in their consciousness. And even within the science world, that now is capable. Granted, one of the biggest reasons why they are that mutable now is because they're sick and tired of the lie. But as I said, I'm okay with that. If the reason why you're open to something new is because you can no longer stomach the years and years and years of propaganda and garbage, you see, because it's not the 1930s anymore, it's not the 1940s or even the 1970s. And so a lot of garbage that was spewed from the mouths of politicians about the future world, you see, and about the growing economy and about immigration, or like you start talking about, the environment. Yeah, a lot of that might have been still, people might have stupidly accepted that back in those days. But see, we're already 25 years on from all that time. And that garbage is not, people are resisting it. They're not accepting it. Even this rubbish about, what Bush is talking about Iraq and Iran and all of that. And certainly this whole pro-Israel nonsense. People are not buying into it anymore, and that's good. And people are starting to see the inconsistencies. So as we move down year by year by year now, there's going to be a major shift. And I believe that a greater group of the people of the world are going to start having at least the rudiments of a consciousness that can accept a broader and larger picture. And the reason why they're doing it is not out of natural curiosity and not out of passion or desire, because they really want their world to be shaken up, but because the lie itself, becomes unsustainable. Because I've said so many times that nature abhors a vacuum, as the scientists know. Nature also abhors evil. Nature also abhors that which is anti-natural. Nature also abhors a lie. So we have the greatest ally on our side, which is nature. The fact that an evil exists, or the very fact that something anti-natural exists, is its own downfall. By existing contrary to the laws and ordinances of nature, you're basically signing your own death warrant. It just is a matter of how long that takes for a spring cleaning to come. I look at the astrology and I can already see that that spring cleaning has begun, and it will continue. The movement of the planet Pluto, which as we said is the spring cleaner, you see, is already there. It's already acting. So on one hand you have a lie, on the other hand you've got nature that abhors a lie, that abhors the non-fact, that abhors people to be registering such a low form of consciousness. And you have this nature that will then respond with its own form of spiritual bacteria, its own form of, you see, spiritual virus, to come in and do something about that. Those who really, really studied mysticism know this is a fact. Those who have really studied the martial arts and those who have really studied the natural order know that this is the way that nature operates. So we have the greatest ally on our side. However, though, there are certain people who nothing they can ever do will ever switch into that, you see. So they are the ones that have something to worry about. They're the ones who are contaminating everybody else. They're the ones that you need to know about so that they don't contaminate you. These are the soulless, centerless, narcissistic creatures, the vampires, you see. The people who have never done any spiritual homework in a true sense and who are not going to be able to do it. And when the worst comes in their life, they're going to want to seek out you so they can parasite you to death, because that's the only way that these people know to sustain themselves. All of these questions that I go into in my work, you see. Yes, of course, that's the dark side. Yes, of course, that needs to be always looked out for. But again, never be pessimistic about what's happening, because it's actually a time of great cleansing, and all that your job is to do is to snap into that, to get with it, to understand its nature, to understand those principles, and to attach to nothing, and let it happen. Let that current of energy take you where it needs to be. Throw away the oars and stop trying to direct your life in this egoistic way, you know, that's basically leading everyone over the precipice. There's a different kind of understanding, a different kind of action that is required to go with the flow of what is. There's a different kind of understanding, a different kind of action that is required to go with the flow of what is.
Conversations that I was involved with recently about, how do people get off of the grid? How do people create small communities or sustainable communities? And I think it was really a great conversation, but what I was trying to say too is, this doesn't mean get a mule train and go out to the Yukon and in a log cabin. You can do this without being terribly remote. I think that pulling out of major city centers, I wouldn't recommend anyone living in the middle of a major city center unless that was, what they just felt called to do. But, by stepping out of the mass flow so that your life can slow down, so that you can reflect upon these things. And so then also you're not in the main thrust, you're not in the mainstream. The current is always strongest in the center of a stream where it's surging towards the waterfall, and you come over to the edges, you're going to find the water calms down. It's easier to stand up in that water and not get swept away. So I think.
But also, I agree with you. But we know that most people listening to us do have to live within the city.
Well, I guess so, yeah. But maybe they can do this in their mind, in a sense, too.
Yeah, yeah. I am a complete believer in that, because remember, like we said in the past, where is the untainted spot? Where is the untainted person? When has there ever been a normalcy? The city is just a more abnormal place, but really the whole world is abnormal.
I hear that. I think that's a very valid point, too.
But we can't know for sure. You see, these are generalizations. We don't know. It's up to the individual.
Right.
Some individual may need the contrast of being amongst the dead, or morally dead, or the spiritually dead. A lot of people, like I said, the Nostradamus type of image, where a lot of people feel that they can get closer to their own core, in contrast to that ever-present, racket of the world, the cacophony of the unsane.
Yeah.
Another person may think, no, this is a much, like Jung did. Jung did both. Jung once lived in the city, he was very much there, and then later, he went to Bolagen near the lake and built his tower. But that was very much in the end of his life. So some people can do the two, some people can do a bit of both. I would say find out what your reality is, and again, it's individual. I leave that to the individual. Ultimately, though, you must be able to find the still spot even in the noisiest, most chaotic type of place. This is what I think is very important. I mean, in the West, most of the people listening to us are going to be in a position, whether they themselves accept it or not, that they are much, much more affluent and prosperous than people were even 100 years ago. So, I see people spending millions of dollars on stinking houses that are right beside a freeway. And then they want to tell you that they got problems in their life and they'd rather be, living a much more simple life off the grid. What the hell are you talking about? Your whole actions in life. You don't have to go and look inside your fridge or whatever. And I see contradiction right there. So again, we're a lot of people out there are in a deep state of hypocrisy. And again, you have to be very wary of those people who are looking for an external fixer, like you moving, or like you say, going out to the far off places, or I can't do that yet, I can't disconnect from my job. Well, if you go about like this, no spiritual teacher will accept any of this malarkey, because that's exactly how the mind, we talked about the ego, cops out of making any legitimate change. Believe me, you could be on floorboards in an apartment anywhere in this world. You could literally do it in Calcutta or some place that is a stinking, rat hole of humanity. You can still do it, by the way. This is the beauty of freedom, the true freedom, the mind. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that you should not try to better your material circumstances in every way. You absolutely should, and you're entitled to. This goes with this whole prosperity thing we were addressing earlier on about how you vision your whole world and how you vision yourself and how you envision what it is you think you deserve and so on. Because a lot of people have been surrounded their whole life by the voices of lack, particularly from the parents, the voices of fear, the voices of paranoia. Because I remember give readings as well, so I come across people who have been suffering from this their whole life. They're brilliant people who have no concept of their own genius, their own beauty, their own majesty, because they've had every voice from their husbands and wives, from their friends, you see, to their parents, telling them the opposite, or at least insinuating that you're a failure, you're no good, you're not going to make it, the world is a hard place to live in, it's dog eat dog, Once you listen to that, it becomes a mantra that, of course, you embody, and it takes time to, start to realize, why should I listen to all of that? Why should I, pay attention to all of this? I used to notice the pattern in people that I knew, or people I heard of, whose parents were not like that, who either overtly didn't breed a message like that. And all those people, those sons and daughters, I used to usually admire, because I could see that they were so much more centered, so much, graceful, so much more confident about the world, and that their world was a better world. Their world literally did work for them. And even in the days when I really knew very little psychology, I was able to pick up on that these people's parents, I just saw another example of this about 3-4 days ago when I saw an interview with Bruce Dickinson. He's the singer of the band Iron Maiden. And he was talking a little bit about his background. And even though he came from a very poor, not very poor, but, I would say from an English point of view, a very working class background, his parents were very, very good people who did not stand in his way at all. In fact, they even went out of their way to make his life much easier as a child, right? Well, that's why he's Bruce Dickinson now, is a multimillionaire, and doing all the work he loves. And even not only the recreation, but his vocation is what he loves. Is there a connection? Yes, there is. You can multiply the many examples of this. Now, also, of course, there's another phenomenon in which people who are very hard-pressed often feel motivated to go and create something marvelous, So we can look at it, there's no fixed rule here, but the idea is that it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if at least the parents stopped generating fear energy and lack energy and failure energy to their children. I'm sure that could be something, that would positively help the terrible suffering that most teenagers, you see, experience in this world.
Yeah, and and especially at that age, that was when it was the hardest for me. And I had this wild duality where, I had a mother who was completely supportive, completely there, and continually telling me, as I am, I'm fine. But from my father, and this was the thing about him, he wasn't like he couldn't show love and things like this. I mean, he had trouble with that too, but he would continually say, as I am, the way I am is not okay. I'm going to need to change. If I'm going to make it in this world, you have to change the way you are, because you're basically, screwed up. Where he said, the nail that stands up the highest gets hit the hardest. And I would just go, oh man, And
well, see, this traumatized, obviously something in his past.
Oh yeah.
Traumatized him to this pathological degree, in which he feared, for you. I mean, and let's not say that these are irrational. He may have had very good reasons for thinking this way.
Yeah, because he always said, you're never going to make it if you don't, this world's going to tear you up if you don't do this, And
of course, we know that message is utterly false. The children who come into this world, a lot of them, unfortunately, the parents live through the child. They've suspended their own vivid life, meaning that they become necrotic. They're basically dead mentally, and therefore now they start living through their child, or the child becomes the raison d'etre for why they're alive. Or worse, they do what your father was doing, which is, basically condition your mind into thinking of the world as a tremendously hostile and fearful place, which of course it's not. So this is what I'm talking about this almost silent contract, this programming that takes place. And because of this psychology, this maltreatment of young impressionable minds, it creates a generation of people who go out there to basically then be picked on, be traumatized by those forces that they bring themselves into existence. Because once you believe that once you've been contaminated or programmed to believe these evil forces exist, well then they start manipulating your life. You actually feed that parasite, you see.
Yeah.
It's just it's the way of the parasite. And this is again a lack of psychological learning. We have every other kind of learning, you see, in schools and colleges and universities, until very late in the day when you can sort of choose what subjects you want to go into, and then it's pretty much redundant. But in the impressionable times, unless you're going to Steiner School or Krishnamurti School or whatever, which very few people get that chance, So in the general consensus, you see, unfortunately, we're not taught psychology. We become expert in everything else, in grammar and writing and all these meticulous things that we need to survive, woodwork and, home economics and science and physics and all these amazing things. Even in sports, there's an overwhelming emphasis on sports in most Western schools. But from east to west, the fact is the fact that psychology is almost totally made redundant. Philosophy almost doesn't even exist today. As a curriculum, you have to go toward political science or some other subject like that. And so psychology, and even the psychology that's studied, is really a form of psychiatry. It's not really psychology in the true Freudian and Jungian sense at all. Especially in America, this is the case. It's a highly behavioristic and Pavlovian type of attitude towards the mind. The mind is broken, fix it with drugs. This is basically what's happening in America.
Oh, it's just insane. Yeah.
It's a misused term, very misused term in most of the world. So, unfortunately, we have all of these areas of programming. So my message to people is always to study that, It's always to study these areas in which your independence, your true independence, your true character, whatever your selfhood is, whatever your own scent is, your own true core self, how is that being assaulted? How many ways are they doing it? It's through the food, through the milk, through the sugar, through the meat, through the pharmaceuticals, the pills, etc. And then up to the next level, through the conditioning of the people around you from the time you've been a child. Look at their lives, or were their lives working for them, and your neighbors and all of these people, and start to put together this framework of just how you are in the fishbowl, totally and utterly programmed by all of your environment, because environment, at least, has been understood now as so incredibly important to the development of the mind, and it never stops being. You talked earlier about how the Illuminati, would need so many years to continue their program, that why didn't it end just after the catastrophe, remember?
Yeah, it takes this maintenance, it takes this constant holding down.
Right, because the thing is unnatural, anti-organic to begin with. But anything that is unsustainable in this sense, of course, requires constant injections of energy and constant maintenance and constant blind, obeisance to keep it moving, because it's a thing that if left for 5 minutes on its own would simply rot. Nobody would have anything to do with it, you see. So the whole thing requires constant maintenance.
I think that's a really great thing to look at, because that force that they're holding down, that just shows the strength, and that shows the power within it. And when you do look at every direction, there is something that is blocking your signal.
Right, and what would happen if you got so turned on to the real, like you started doing even a little, society or human beings or the individual, start turning on to what was really happening from within them as opposed to without them, the hands would automatically loosen and all this other shit would drop, just like it has in my life, just like it has happened in the lives of ordinary people who have worked this out. It doesn't require a crown, it doesn't require some gold chain or some special some special genius in a sort of a formal sense at all. It requires being turned on to what you are within. And I guarantee you that when you find what that is, there will be some sort of external, concomitant. You may in turn be a great artist. You might find that it's through making movies, that is an expression. It may very well be even in working with music or working with architecture. All the things that we know can still exist, but they'll now come as an expression, as a permutation of you being turned on within to who you are as you start to discover more of your selfhood. When a person is in that state, their interest, it's like the mad professor, their interest in what's going outside their door and all the other garbage is immediately stopped, you see, and all of that stuff drops out of the way. This is what I meant earlier when I was talking about the Zen way, that when your enemy can no longer destroy you, because you're so absolutely immune to anything that they might do, then you've won the game without ever having to lift a weapon, without ever having to lift a tool of belligerence towards your enemy at all. This is the way that man's future lies. This is the way that his salvation is. You see, and it might be writing, so for somebody it might be writing, for somebody it might be poetry, for somebody it might be working with people in society, it might be the education of children or whatever. Who knows? It could be any number of things. But the attention to the lie, the dependency upon all those manufactured things that are just so nonsensical, the affluenza, you see, this whole hyper interest in the material world and the shopping malls and all the garbage that's been created for us. the maintenance of the lie ends on the day when people find the truth within themselves. And it's not going to be a destructive thing. It will be destructive to those who are destroyers, but that's okay. It's perfect. It's a perfect solution. Let them be devoured by their own energy. Let them be devoured by what they are. Because as I said, that which is unsustainable, if left for 5 minutes without maintenance, would rot of its own nature and you wouldn't have it anymore. We have to discover what it is within us on all levels, but physical. What are our physical needs that call this monstrosity into being? What is on our emotional and spiritual and psychological level? What's it even on our relationship level? What is it in all the levels that we have these needs, where something brilliant and excellent has been taken away and removed from us, and something artificial and deathly has been replaced? This is what is behind the subliminal problem of subliminal advertising, where subliminals and art and beautiful creativity could be used to take your soul up to incredible heights, is now being used to destroy you and to confuse the minds of children and to make them bulimic and all these dietary horrors, that young girls have and all of this kind of thing, all being created by the subliminal. Yes, exactly, the anorexia. All of this nonsense, all of this image manufacturing, you see. If a man or a woman was, solid inside themselves and not a thing that anybody else said to them mattered, do you think they'd buy into all this garbage on television and all this malarkey about, how you should look and what you should be thinking and how you should be dressing and all of this stuff? People would laugh to death over it. But there's been a slow, gradual raping of what man is, and that rape is psychological. It is not political. This is what people have to understand. And once they understand this, they'll pick up the psychological tools, you see, to, set this aright. Here we are again, not just with the Brown Wilson Keys subliminal thing. Hold your breath, will you, and wait for the medical profession to come out and tell you the real psychological reasons for bulimia and anorexica and similar dietary. Jesus, hold your breath. We're still waiting.
Exactly, yeah.
Hey, academics, we're still waiting. You know it all, right? These are the same guys you're going to have criticizing the alternative community, and yet all the alternative guys have answered this. Why these pernicious things exist. Brown Wilson Keys has explained how the subliminal stuff on television creates this in the psyche of man. Vance Packard, you see, and Jim Kilbourne have done that on the subliminal thing. There's been other essays and great books written about the whole, just the whole image lie, you see. A couple have been written from academics, but mostly it's been from outsiders, journalists, investigative journalists, etc. All sorts of things that have been into the whole satanic thing as well. How evil and the satanic sort of, what am I thinking of, the rock videos and the pop videos. See, all of it, no academic has ever dealt with that. No academic is dealing with Columbine. No academic is dealing with any of the childhood problems. They claim they are just so they can get $1 million in their bank account budget, but they're not really telling us what the story is, and yet the whole story has been written off by, has been explained by those who are non-academics. Yet again, we find, hold your breath, let the academics do it, right? And nothing happens. All they want to do is give pills to these children, antidepressants. What about the ADD, right? What about all the garbage they give the kids? They manufacture the problem, like I said earlier, and then they come up with a solution, and we buy into it. Again, very easy to stop that. But you have to be a whole person. You have to seek for wholeness in a completely different way. And see, the teachers who are teaching this now is quite lacking, of course. We don't have too many, teachers in this. But, my work on the blog and the forum and any of my websites, I try to put, the links there for people to start researching, the John Gattos and the people who are setting up alternative types of, study and alternative schooling, you see. And hopefully, people like yourself and my friends Henrik and Frederick, from Red Ice and others.
Exactly. Yeah.
We can use our websites and we can use our interfaces to steer people. And I really hope that people go and look at these links. They don't just take it for granted. I mean, I know a lot of people do take it for granted. They come on and just blab away, and they don't.
Your links can take like 3 years. Just
I guess that's true too. I am a bit demanding when it comes to things like that, but because I feel so passionate about it, Adam, I really, believe in this. I mean, people should definitely be checking out the Nikki Rapana information that I've got up there. Her interviews on Jeff Rentz's with Jeff Rentz. I definitely want that. I want people to get into Brian Garish, all the information about the common purpose. The whole idea, it's an extension of the Fabian Society machinations.
Right.
I certainly want people to continue to check out the AIDS hoax nonsense, because you're going to be meeting people who still have this problem. So there's a lot of links, but there's certain ones, especially these ones on the Jesuit order, for instance. I mean, just cherry pick them, try to check out some of the ones that are of greater importance.
Your link page, not only being the most organized page I've seen, and the longest. Well, that's what is my point, is that it is so well organized. People could go there and find their particular, area of interest. It's obvious that, just to go one by one, it would take forever.
Yeah.
But
and I know that people do that. I know they do that. But again, if your education is your thing, or child rearing is your thing, or you've got a disease or an illness, never think for a moment that you have to go into the arms of Big Brother. There's so many ways. There's not an illness that the mind can create that cannot be cured. Have that kind of positivity. Have that kind of selfhood. Doubt everything. Doubt everything you're told by everybody, and continue the research on your own. Look, everything that happens into your life, you see, has a meaning. I'm from that school. I'm from the school where everything that happens in your life, no matter how disastrous, has a meaning. And when you truly and fundamentally understand that, you lose your fear, and you're able to go with that event. It's only your thinking that turns it into something disastrous or horrific.
I'm 100% behind that, and I agree with it completely. Even to I do lots of construction. I'm always working on something, right? And anytime I hit my finger with a hammer, or I nick myself with the saw, I've termed it Ocu-smash. Well, I smashed the bejesus out of my hand, so I go, well, you've done that. You might as well utilize it. Allow it to move some chi. Allow it to, open some channels. And it works.
I agree with
way,
you. I totally agree. Even if, some cop gives you a good kicking in a cell, people look at the dark things that happen,
Well,
but if you start, open that mindset, if people open this ocularity that you're talking about and start to see their life in a broader spectrum, you would have the answer. Because all the so-called tribulations and happen to you, or happen in the world around you, it sort of ties along with everything we've been saying. It's very important because everything that's happening is not happening to others. It's one of the ways that I personally vindicate this idea that, you shouldn't be concerned what the masses are going to do, or how everything's affecting the world. Think of yourself, and think of the idea of that everything that happens, even if it happens to other people, if you hear about it, if it's happening in the world, it ultimately is happening to you. Your brain is turned on, you're aware, you're conscious. There is an I-ness about the world, and no matter how much you negate the fact of the self.
Yeah.
Without the self, nothing is.
I always try to say it as, well, where is anything ever happening anyway, right? I mean,
right.
It's in your ears, it's in your eyes,
yep.
And so that means it's happening within your brain, and then, of course, your consciousness, because, as you said, mind and brain are separate.
They do, and they're programmed differently. That's the main thing to realize, is that the brain is an extension of consciousness, but it's programmed by the world almost. It's almost entirely programmed by your experiences of this life, whereas the mind is programmed by all lives. It's tied into the collective of mankind, womankind, so it's a repository, it's a reservoir of all learning, all knowledge, all ideas, all experiences, not just of your individual life, but of all the lives of everyone who genetically, racially has lived before you, etc. The brain is just yours, more like it's programmable in this instance, and by experiences of this life. This is the thing to remember. And unfortunately, we have expert programmers out there. Like I said, we have to really challenge a lot of this programming. But it's great fun. When you start to realize that you're discovering greater depth within your own self, I mean, what could be more of a turn on? When you realize that everything else is to iron you out and make you just a robot, a total, gray man, walking around, obeying, obedient, and totally, one-dimensional, then surely it can't be too much of a difficulty for that person who finally starts to realize this to open up to who they are, inwardly. I mean, granted that they have a self, like I always maintain in my work, there are a lot of people around there who don't have a self and who have murdered themselves. So of course this doesn't go for everyone in the human family. It's the way it is. There's some people who will never get this, and we have to be all right with that. There's certain people in our own families, there's certain people very close to us who are never going to get it. We need to be all right with that as well. Cut them loose and say, I trust that you can take care of your own life. I don't need to be participant in this, nor do I need to let your limited mindset or, whatever type of contaminated, ideology, worldview that you have, I no longer need to let that contaminate my life because, I'm taking care of myself. And we need to get back to that in a true and healthy way that's not belligerent, that's not envious, that's not separatist in a negative sense, but is absolutely, spirituul.
Yeah, and so it's okay for you to be where you're at now, in that sense.
Oh, yeah.
To pull
I agree
back.
with that.
You said this once before too, that it's not a matter of time, that they will have their time to become aware,
Well, it's important too that people don't start to go and unload their. See, we're not just talking about contamination of people that you know. A lot of people, when they're seeking for the truth of the light, they start to go and get contaminated by their gurus and by these priests and pastors and politicians. So, there's many levels of this. People may not think they're doing it first.
Seeking the Savior.
Seeking the well, yes, this is the whole point. Unfortunately, more and more, it tells me that things are, changing. That people are doing this. That they are again seeking for some other guy with the answers. And the danger, of course, is that person you can be unloading your own inner self, your own inner wisdom, because some guru or guy in some Tibetan toga is telling you what is, and this is extremely dangerous. It's not spirituality. It's one of the things that's actually caused some of the abject horrors in our world. And if people don't believe this, they need to go to India, make a study of India, or any other place that has this kind of priest-archy operating in such an egregious way. Or study even the history of mankind, you see. These are some of the areas. But I believe that all these parasites, all of these different things that are in existence, as I said, came out of man negating his own selfhood, assisted by those forces that want that to continue. But I'll repeat again that, you see, once man turns within, starts to get a center of who and what he is, without any ropes, without any maps, without any kind of, preconceived ideas, and starts to delve into the inner world in a holistic way, yeah. I believe his interest in all this other shit will actually, of its own nature, fade away quite naturally. Really, I do believe that. So it's not something that's going to require effort or mass movements or mass aggression or placarding in the streets or, any other type of, belligerent aggressive energy at all. Quite the reverse. Quite the reverse. It's something completely different. Anyway, Adam, we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Yeah, okay.
Not that I wouldn't love to talk on more, but I got things to do.
I think we got we've done quite a bit. I think this was a fantastic talk, and I just can't thank you enough for spending the time. You're doing a really great service and a great job. I just very happy that we've been able to have these talks, and again, I just can't thank you enough. It's really good.
Well, thank you, and thanks for hosting me. I mean, this is also a process. I don't have all the answers. I'm learning as I go. Everything I'm putting out there in a published form is my own discoveries based on my own experience. So experience is teaching me, and then I just write it down or whatever, present it. Mm-hmm. This is a process. I'll learn new things tomorrow. I'll have to revise a lot of things.
It's just so true. And
anyway, again, thank you a lot for the time. We'll definitely meet up and be doing this again.
Okay, I really do appreciate it, and you put that on the podcast link up on your forum there. I got 2,000 downloads that one day.
Oh my God, that's a hell of a lot.
And in the last
there'll be more because things have been growing incredibly, and the new book is coming out soon. So there'll be a lot more interest. I get tremendous feedback, and as I say, it's wonderful to see. I myself cannot be anything but optimistic, because even though I understand that there's pernicious things out there, I never lose focus. That there are people who are very much turned on by what I'm doing.
The potential is in the problem, like you're saying, that if it don't kill you, it makes you stronger. And here we have these elements that are eating away at us, but yet they're doing it with the tools that we will use to heal ourselves. And so, as you said, once we learn these, really analyze and understand this problem, it will show us exactly, what is ours to take back and to hold on.
But the one thing, exactly, and the one thing you can be sure about any parasite, no matter what kind of parasite it is, it must be into you because you're real juicy. Yeah, it's sucking off you, right? It's sucking off you because you've got something it wants, something that it really values. So somebody told me once, that. And I've always held it as a great motto, how great you must be if your enemies are this powerful. Mm-hmm. Somebody said it, I don't know who it was, but they said that you always know the strength of a person by the strength of his enemies.
Well, that is, yeah.
Right? The quality of a person. You really know the quality of the person by the strength of his enemies. And believe me, we're talking about the super enemies of the world here. We're talking about, descendants of the Nephilim. You can't get any bigger than that.
And that they have to work so hard to hold it down. So once people really feel that and can take a hold of that, And yeah, maybe you are surrounded. Maybe it is coming from all sides. But you know what? I think Aikido, is a great martial art skill to study, because what Aikido shows you is that your force is Sensei always says, the Aiki of the universe, that means the harmony or the self-correcting nature of the universe, is happening 100% of the time. It never stops happening. And so any action of imbalance can be instantly brought into balance simply by applying the Aiki of the universe. So really, in his power was never his. His power was simply that the Aiki of the universe could travel through his hands, and with just the flick of a finger, people are flying all across the room. And it was incredible skill that in understanding, that it's happening 100% of the time for us. So all we have to do is get out of the way. All we have to do is stop interfering with that process and allow it to happen.
Now, is the word, that's why Aikido is called Aikido, because the A-K-I, is that what that means?
A-I-K-I, Aiki means harmony, and Do simply means way. So it's like Kendo. That's like that, I think Ken would be sword or something. It's the way, and Dojo, it's the place where you practice the way. And so Do is almost like Tao.
Understood.
Tao.
Okay. Well, interesting. Okay.
So Aiki is the ever-present aspect of all things in the universe and life that is self-healing, self-correcting, and self-harmonizing 100% of the time. So this is always happening. It's a principle of the universe, and so that's the Aikido. Yeah.
I had no idea that. That makes a lot of sense, because remember, the weaker force is the force that's out of harmony.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. That's, and I totally concur with that.
This power of the Aiki is attained through subtlety. It's you don't attack force with force. You allow that force to correct itself, so all you simply do is redirect the force. So some people mistakenly say, well, Aikido is the skill of using the force of the attacker against himself. And no, you don't do that, because actually you're seeking harmony. So you wouldn't even use the force of the attacker against himself. You would redirect that force to some place where it wouldn't harm anyone.
Right.
And that's the true Aiki. And it may be to redirect that force into the position where now you have the attacker, and his arm is in this position where simply you twist your body to the left, 2 more centimeters, and it snaps in 3 places. Well, okay, yeah, but you don't snap the arm. You allow this attacker to maybe say, maybe I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, but in my reading of it, even if you did cause that person pain or death, you're still rectifying the harmony.
Well, that would be the next step. Okay, he doesn't want to stop this direction. This course is not stopping, so the next thing is to protect the attacker and to protect the people in the room. We maybe need to now immobilize this arm,
Right.
And of course the ultimate would be
you
have to save him from everyone and put them out of everyone else's misery.
And this would be, if I'm reading you correctly, the epitome or the extension of what we normally refer to as defense, in the sense of that violence is correct when it's a defensive violence.
Exactly. Well, and it doesn't reach violence when it's in the Aiki state. It's like Bruce Lee said, fighting without fighting. When you start to fight, you've already lost. When there's no fight, there's no one there to fight. But you're not sitting there getting beat on, You're respecting life, and you are defensive of life in that you're protecting it, And so, yeah, you need to be bold, and you need to, in Aikido, most of the moves are you step into the attack. You don't go away from it. You go to meet it. And so by going to meet it, you've now corrected distance. So say a punch is coming to you, well, you enter into the punch, and now the punch is already past you, has no power. But yeah, you are in this incredibly powerful position now. And then the Aiki comes with your choosing to use it in a way that benefits everyone involved, and so you don't really let that attack become an attack.
Well, what happens if also the motivation for the defensiveness, the challenge towards the other person, is born out of a great understanding that you're protecting something you love? See, it doesn't make sense to defend something that is worthless. So only the self-possessed human being, the man who understands the value of his own nature, the value of his own being, can be this kind of person who is the perfect, martial artist, let's say. Let's just explore that for a moment. That it's not so much that he's in an antagonism against an enemy, right, which is what most violence is. You just spot an enemy, you hate him, and you want to kill him or fight him in a more belligerent, overt way like that. This is a type of defensiveness that's born out of a deep and abiding awareness of our love of what you are. I think that Tolkien brought this out in the book, and also the film version of Lord of the Rings brought this up, that these people were under attack by viral energies, right? By dark wizards, by evil, that were trying to destroy everything that was, held sacred. And they were the epitome of evil, so therefore defensive war, defensive violence was, justified in that instance. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly, because I believe that life chooses life, and when something is that driven to extinguish life, well, you have to choose life. And so the ultimate protection of life is the final decision. Now, if you were fighting something at that point of intensity, which is obviously bent on complete and total destruction, it's going to kill everything in the room, well, you would, of course, have to seek that permanent solution.
All right.
But in a lot of self-defense situations, what you have is you have emotions that have boiled to extremes. You have people that have lost their cool and lost their balance, and they're mad and they're angry and they're throwing their weight around.
Okay, now that would then, in my schema that I pointed out, that would be hatred of the other as opposed to love of self. See, so there's the dividing line. That at that point, when the emotions get out of control like that, you're now seeking, you're the one who's actually imbalanced at that point, because your energies are now focused on extinguishing, you see, destroying, right, in a belligerent way, your so-called opponent that you find is now a threat to you. So in other words, it's like a perceived threat, right, in which your energies are now going to destroy the other person. However, the other side of the line is when you are being attacked yourself, and out of trying to preserve that which you deem most essential, or even that you love, which is selfhood, etc. You have a violence of your own. It's the only way I can see it. Maybe it's the wrong language to use, but
that's why Osensei would always say, it's a matter of training, and it's a matter of skill. And the higher your skill, the more you're allowed to choose peace. If you have no self-defense skill at all, you can never choose peace. You can only be permitted to have peace by those that would have the power to either take it or grant it. So you understand what I mean? You can only choose peace when you have the skill to be able to defend yourself against great forces. And so if your skill is at one level and you're attacked by violent forces, you don't really have many options beyond destroying the attacker. And actually destroying the attacker is some of the simplest forms of martial art. To actually just outright destroy the attacker. To be able to quench the attack, to be able to put the total fire out of it, from your balance, from your center, from your Aiki, that is a very, very high skill and a very, very powerful and well-trained martial artist. And also a spiritual master who is able to see, beyond the attacker and see that it's this is this person's imbalance, this is their illness and their problem. Right. It's not my problem. My problem is to make sure that nobody gets hurt. But in Osensei's mind, that meant also the attacker, even though he was out of harmony, he's still a part. Everything is a part. There's no part that, you know, there's screwed up parts and there's connected parts, and, you know, there's the George Bushes and there's all that, but that doesn't mean that they're not a part. You follow? So in his mind, everything was whole and everything was worthy of protection. But he was certainly not saying, you know, that there's no point at which you wouldn't have to extinguish something that had gotten to that point, which would be that kind of violence that's seeking to kill without, you know.
And your explanation sort of, you know, helps to reinforce what I was saying earlier, that the fullest concomitant of that form of defensiveness is that, say, you were fighting great odds, but they could no longer contest you. They wouldn't even involve you because they literally knew that you were of that high grade. Meaning, in other words, what I was saying earlier about being immune. If you could be physically, psychically, or whatever, and I always focus on the psychological. So if a man was psychologically, spiritually, morally even, perhaps, so immune that he was not able to be infected by anything that comes down to us by these sorcerers, whose main focus is our psychology rather than our physical incarceration, the full concomitant of that is that you wouldn't have an enemy anymore. The enemy of its own game would have to wrap up. It would have to wrap up its game.
Yeah.
It would be utterly, you know, weakened just by the fact that you were strong. You know, I've always believed that that is the way to go.
Well, you know, I mean, when I first started martial arts, it was because this one karate instructor broke up a fight I was in, and we had moved from the country to the city, and that one year, man, every time I left school, somebody wanted to fight me, it seemed like. You know, I was the new kid, I was kind of different. I had these little black glasses, you know, and I was fairly small. So I guess I looked like, yeah, you know, all the guys that have been getting beat on thought, well, I'll get this one, you know, or whatever, but it seemed like I was getting in a fight every time I turned around. Well, I wasn't that easy to beat up for one thing, but maybe it was something I carried around because, you know, after I started studying martial arts, I never ever got in a fight. And to this day, there's been a couple of close calls, like when I lived in some rough, kind of like in the ghetto area of Oakland. But, you know, I'm not that much of a skilled martial artist or anything like that, but I do know how to take care of myself, and I also know, well, I taught self-defense, and mostly to women, and what I taught them was fairly deadly, because, you know, unless you're going to go to the dojo every day and train, if you want to defend yourself, you really need to know the basic shut-off points, the human system shut-off points. And there are temporary points and permanent points. And it's a matter of gauging the level of, you know, severity. If you feel that that person is threatening your life and the life of your family and things like this, well, you know, and you don't have skills, you're not strong enough, you know, to really make choices like that, well, you shut them off. You shut them off at the source. I feel like it's almost a disservice to life, and in a sense, I just don't understand non-self-defense at all, you know. I just don't.
Oh, me neither. I remember in ancient days, it was absolutely, you know, second nature for people to know how to use weapons, and for people to, you know, have, even just through rites and rituals, you know, strengthen themselves and be aware of self-defense. You know, again, it's a pernicious thing that we got to sort of have a society that is so unjust in so many ways, you know.
Well, I almost brought it up when you were talking earlier. You were talking about using skills. You're not going to match, like if you're being met by unsurmountable odds, you're not going to try to match it with those same odds, or you're not going to attack the attacker with the same tools he's attacking you with. I think that's what you said. And I thought, well, that's ninjutsu, you know, which is...
Well, I really believe it. I really believe it.
Well, most people don't understand the story of the ninja. The way I understood it, and I think I got this from a martial art teacher, was that, you know, they were getting tired of getting the samurai testing their swords on them. You know, they were just farmers, they were peasants, and they knew they were just being used completely. I mean, a samurai literally will get a new sword and he'll go, I want to see if it really works. And to him, what he means by really works is that it'll go clean through a human body. There's like 7 different, you know, ways of cutting a human in complete, you know, half, and a good sword will do that, just fly right through you like butter. And so he'd turn around and he'd say, okay, and they're so polite, I'm going to test this sword and I'll test it on you on Monday. Then he'll come back and he'll cleave you in half on Monday. Nice, polite samurai way. And that was kind of the way life was in Japan, that, the serfs had nothing, so some of them went, this freaking sucks. So they headed out to the hills. And so they sent samurai after them, and they got to some of them, and some of them they didn't get to, and they said, if we're going to make it out here, we're going to, one, have to learn how to hide like really good, and we're going to have to be sneaky as all get out, and then we're going to have to learn how to fight these warriors who are the greatest warriors on the earth, practically. The samurai is one of the highest trained warriors you'll ever going to meet, But the thing is, too, they have this ethic, and they have this samurai code and the samurai way, and they have a certain way of fighting. So the ninja said, we're going to use everything they don't use. So they come at us standing straight up, we're going to roll up under them. We're going to stick it right in their groin. We're going to use every dirty trick, every sneaky, way, we can find to try to defeat these guys. Because standing up face to face with a samurai warrior is suicide. So that's what they mastered, and then they got really good at it. They called it the skilled ninjutsu, and the main art of ninjutsu is hiding, camouflage, and defensive skills that are, in a sense, hidden. But it was all self-defense against, unbelievable opposition. And actually what happened that gave the ninja the bad names is they got so good at that, some clans decided to take it to the bank, and then that's where the ninja as the assassin became, it was a reality. It was, it's been overblown by Hollywood for sure, but some clans did say, hey, look, we're going to go, get it back and take charge ourselves, and so they got materialistic, selfish goals. Mm-hmm. And they weren't, they were organic farmers. They were into nature. Old ninjutsu had things like, cleansing in the waterfalls and this love of nature and all that kind of thing. It was part of it, but
Well, there's something in our consciousness that we contaminate. It's just a lot of people don't want to come up with their own ideas, so they always plagiarize, or as I say, it comes under the heading of envy again. It's okay for these traits to be part of SAS training now and commando training, but because it's again purely belligerent, but not because it's actually part of your spiritual immunity. It's part of your rituals and rites of your cult or your nation. You see, everything that is good, seems to just get so contaminated. Anyway, I have a phone call coming in pretty soon. I'm going to have to get going. But again, big thanks for having me on, and look forward to hearing it.
Well, thank you very, very much again, and I hope that sometime we do it again. And
oh yeah, definitely. Love to.
I'm looking forward to that DVD, the work you're doing with Henrik and Frederick. Those guys are so cool.
When that comes out, and then the new book comes out, we can definitely do another show.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Okay, Adam.
Alrighty.
All the best, man.
Alrighty, I'll stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. So, thank you all for coming along on this 3-part expedition with Michael Tsarion. Now, coming up in the next episode, episode number 10, we have John Lash on board the Psychonautilus. So I hope you're looking forward to that. And John Lash is a Gnostic scholar, a comparative mythologist, astrologer, and I would have to say old school psychonaut. Just the best kind. So with John Lash, we go deeply into psychonautics. We go into entheogenic experiences and grounding ourselves within the Sophia or Gaia spirit of the planet, and how this can be the rudder for your psychonautic adventures. Well, very good. Yeah, very good. You blow your own nose. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so after John Lash, we will have Neil Kramer on board the Psychonautilus, and we will look deeply into the many aspects and stages of the transcendental journey. So now we must navigate this Psychonautilus towards some interdimensional spaceport where we will stock up on gear and supplies for our next expedition. So I hope to see you all then on board the Psychonautilus. Go work outside, go find Kame. Where's Kame? Where's Kame? Yeah? What does he say? What does Zorg say? Yeah, that's the kitty. That's what the kitty says. What does Kame say? Yeah, woof woof. What does Zorg say? Yeah, meow. Yeah. And how do you do Kung Fu? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Kung Fu. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Very good.